Chapter 507. Reading. Of course, Fan Lun could recognize Lu Wen. The two of them had only fought for a few decades. This amount of time was like the blink of an eye for overgods. Fan Lun finally realized that this was a plot against him. What time god? He was just a clone of the person before him. Who knew how many years he had schemed for him to leave behind a flawless clone here? No one would have thought that this was the truth. Lu Wen. Fan Lun was an overgod after all. After his initial shock, he quickly calmed down. He was in his own divine kingdom. What was there to be afraid of against an opponent of the same level? Even though he had been injured by the sneak attack, he did not believe that the other party could take him down so easily. As time passed, the other overgods would definitely notice that something was wrong here. When the 13 overgods surrounded him, the other party would probably have to think about how to escape. However, just as Fan Lun had this thought, he felt a chill behind him. A shadow had appeared behind him at some point, and a shadow sword directly pierced into his back. The power of this sword was so great that even the shadow sword itself could not withstand it. The laws seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. With Ji Yunan's current cultivation level, the body of the heretic god seemed to be able to crush his own laws, reaching a whole new level. To Ji Yunan, the increase in his cultivation level was more important in strengthening his body, making it harder for others to withstand his attacks and destroy his body. As for the laws themselves, they became insignificant. Fan Lun was indeed unable to resist this punch at all. His divine body instantly turned into pure laws and scattered everywhere in the divine kingdom. With Lu Wen around, he naturally could not let him escape. He had already completely sealed off the divine kingdom of time. This was a divine kingdom constructed from the laws of time. Since Fan Lun had no time to manage it, it was much easier for Lu Wen to take over. For a moment, Ji Yunan had a feeling that it would be much more convenient to bring someone with the same laws when he killed overgods in the future. Of course, apart from Fan Lun, he probably would not have such an opportunity in the future. Ji Yunan's aura only appeared for a moment. After killing Fan Lun once, he did not appear again to avoid attracting the attention of the other overgods. Foolish man. Fan Lun's voice reverberated throughout the entire divine kingdom. He was the time master, and this was his own divine kingdom. Even if his divine body was destroyed, he would not retreat. However, Fan Lun was no fool. He wasn't stupid enough to condense another divine body and wait for Ji Yunan to instantly kill him. He was purely controlling the laws to fight. Of course, without his divine body as a focal point, his control over the nomological laws was also weakened. If Ji Yunan were to turn around and destroy his divine kingdom, he would be able to destroy his tens of thousands of years of hard work in a short time. However, the reason he had done so was because Fan Lun had recognized Ji Yunan the moment he had attacked. He was betting that the other party would not dare to appear again. With just Lu Wen alone, he would be able to delay the other party with just his laws. Fan Lun was right, but also wrong. His mistake was that he thought that Ji Yunan would not appear again, but he did not expect that the other party would come with more than 2 people. An inexplicable fluctuation reverberated from the time divine kingdom. All the living beings in the entire divine kingdom suddenly felt a slight tremor under their feet, and then the tremor rapidly increased in a short period of time. Earthquake! Earthquake! Earth! No. This is not an earthquake, this was indeed not a simple earthquake. Instead, the entire earth veins had been turned upside down from the 9 underworlds. Under the overturned earth, whether you were a deity or a mortal, you would not have any ability to resist. Some people tried to use the nomological laws to calm the earth, but unfortunately, they did not know that this phenomenon was caused by the supreme nomological laws. The 9 Souls Star Lord, 9 Souls, controlled the power of the earth veins and the 9 underworlds. He had the ability to devour the earth, and with a flip of his hand, he could destroy tens of thousands of living beings. By the time Fan Lun realized this, it was already too late for him to stop it. And the true realm of 9 souls was undoubtedly revealed under this attack. 15 levels. This world's most ancient Star Lord was already a super expert on par with Austin, and truly stood at the peak of the world. Under the suppression of 15 levels of nomological laws, and with Lu Wen restraining him from the side, Fan Lun could not resist at all. He could only watch as his divine kingdom fell. All of you will die here. Fan Lun could not help but reform his body, and angrily stared at Lu Wen. You should worry about yourself first. A calm voice rang out behind him. With a punch from Ji Yunan, this newly formed divine body also shattered. And after Ji Yunan revealed himself this time, he no longer had any intention of hiding. With the huge commotion caused by 9 souls, it was impossible for the other lords to not notice it. What they needed to do now was to race against time. Do it. Lu Wen naturally understood this as well. He shouted in a low voice, but his hands did not slow down as he swept through the divine kingdom as quickly as possible. For deities, the divine kingdom was their foundation, while for lords, their divine kingdom became their shield. If one wanted to kill a lord who had already fused with the nomological laws, they first had to destroy their divine kingdoms. Only then would they have a chance of stripping their divine duties. A lord god's divine kingdom was naturally extremely prosperous, but under the combined forces of 3 Dao integration stage cultivators, it was still unable to withstand a single blow. Disregarding everything else, just the overturning of the earth veins was enough to destroy the divine kingdom. Before the other lords arrived, the divine kingdom of time had already been completely destroyed. Lu Wen heaved a sigh of relief. Next, they just had to find Fan Lun's location and kill him. However, at this moment, 9 Souls' expression changed slightly. Austin is here. You two go find Fan Lun. His body swayed, and the 9 Souls abruptly disappeared, only to be replaced by boundless holy light. Intruders. Austin's gaze landed on the 2 of them, holy light surrounding him flickering faintly. By taking in the evil god, you are no different from accompanying him in death. Lu Wen laughed. You don't have to worry about that. As soon as his voice fell, a dim light suddenly lit up on the ground and pounced straight at Austin. This god of light and justice did not even raise his head. He merely pointed casually, and holy light instantly enveloped the ground below. The 2 beams of light collided, but seemed to be evenly matched. This was because the level of nomological laws was similar, and the difference in their cultivation levels was also similar. It was impossible to determine the victor in a short period of time. Meanwhile, 9 Souls' intention was only to delay Austin and allow Lu Wen and Ji Yunan to kill Fan Lun before the other lords arrived. Unfortunately, 9 Souls had never truly exchanged blows with Austin before, so he had miscalculated one point. The other party did not just wield holy light. Austin frowned slightly. As the holy light flickered, he had already revealed his true form. There were 12 pairs of pure white wings on his back, and his golden, curly hair almost reached his waist. He held a holy sword in his left hand, but his right hand was raised lightly. Chapter 508. Read. Austin was too powerful. He was hailed as the #1 main god in history, not only because of his extremely terrifying holy light, but also because he wielded 2 main god laws. Light and justice, both were the supreme laws of this world. At this moment, Austin thrust his sword out, and a projection of his sword landed where the holy light and 9 underworlds intersected. The power of the 2 sides rapidly melted away. After all, Ju Po was fighting away from home, and was unable to receive the support of his own star realm. How could he possibly compare to Austin in terms of the number of laws? In just an instant, a hole was torn open in the power of 9 underworlds, and the holy light rapidly surged in the direction where Lu Wen and Fanla had disappeared. However, right at this moment, a large black hole suddenly appeared at the top of the holy light, as if it had been forcefully blown apart by someone. Ju Po also took this opportunity to quickly mend the hole that had suddenly appeared. Only then did he have the thought to look in that direction. Ji Yunan's figure, which was punching forward, gradually appeared in the dissipating holy light. His entire body was covered in burn marks from the holy light, but they were recovering rapidly. He even flashed a smile at Austin. With Ji Yunan's understanding of Austin, he naturally wouldn't let go of Ju Po's mistake. Evil god! Dense killing intent appeared in Austin's cold eyes, and he hurled his holy sword out without hesitation. Ji Yunan was also very straightforward. Knowing that he had been fixed on the spot by the holy light, he didn't even bother to dodge, allowing the holy sword to pierce through his heart. Then, as if nothing had happened, he patted the wound and quickly turned to leave, stepping on Austin's holy sword as he did so. Fan Lun couldn't have run far. The divine kingdom of time had been sealed by Lu Wen, and he himself had been injured twice. His godhead had already been mostly destroyed, so where could he run to? Fan Lun was naturally unreasonable, and he had never suffered such a great loss ever since he had reached the Tao integration stage. At this moment, he couldn't help but want to put his life on the line. Fan Lun's figure reappeared, and he mobilized the remaining power of the divine kingdom of time. Taking advantage of the fact that Ji Yunan had yet to return, he attacked Lu Wen with all his might. Lu Wen merely smiled. "I wasn't afraid of you even as a clone, let alone now." As soon as he finished speaking, Fan Lun felt as if the reign of time had suddenly reversed. Space and time had become chaotic and disorderly, completely out of his control. Time and space. An intoxicated look appeared in Fan Lun's eyes. The realm of space and time as one was exactly what he had been pursuing. Now that he saw it in the hands of the enemy, it was really, what he didn't know was that Lu Wen had already obtained the grand Daos of space and time when he fused the Dao all those years ago. It was just that Lu Wen Dao's understanding of the law of space was too shallow back then, and he had no choice but to separate his comprehension of the law of space, which formed the space dragon that he carried with him. The two of them belonged to two different great worlds and achieved the great Tao of time in the same era, but the difference in their realms was still there. Due to the reversal of space-time, Fan Lun's laws were completely suppressed. He couldn't even put up any effective resistance and could only watch helplessly as his godhead was repeatedly eroded by time. Having lost his divine kingdom as his foundation, Fan Lun was depleting his law energy with every passing second, and it looked like he was about to perish in the reign of time. But at this time, who could save him? Austin was held up by Ju Po, and the other main gods had yet to arrive. Moreover, even if they did arrive, would they have the ability to break into the reign of time? Just as Fan Lun was sinking into despair, he sensed an aura appear beside him, seemingly completely unaffected by the reign of time. There really was someone who could enter. In the next instant, Fan Lun's body shattered. This time, even his godhead was completely shattered, and there was no chance of him surviving. With the combined power of 3 Dao integration stage cultivators, coupled with Lu Wen's countless years of planning, a main god had finally perished. Ji Yunan's figure appeared beside Lu Wen. He didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt for snatching Fan Lun's head. After all, to him, Fan Lun's death would only count. Lu Wen didn't care about this. After Fan Lun died, he rapidly gathered up his shattered godhead, and the time laws that belonged to Fan Lun all fell into his hands. "Let's go." Ju Po's voice sounded beside their ears. Having achieved their goal, the three of them had no intention of staying any longer. If they stayed any longer, they might be trapped by the other main gods forever. From the moment Ji Yunan and the other two entered the world of gods to the moment Fan Lun died, the entire process did not take more than 15 minutes. With the 3 Dao integration stage cultivators joining forces, they fully demonstrated what was called efficiency. The main reason why a main god could perish so easily was because Lu Wen had made sufficient preparations, leaving Fan Lun with nowhere to run and completely unprepared. When Fan Lun let down his guard and allowed Lu Wen's doppelganger to enter the divine kingdom, and even arrive in front of him, his fate had already been sealed. When Lu Wen arrived in the world of gods, he had no time to waste. He immediately released the laws that he had gathered up. He didn't hide from Ju Po and Ji Yunan. Perhaps it was because he couldn't care less, because Fan Lun's godhead had already been shattered by Ji Yunan, and it was already showing signs of dissipating. The time laws were flung out by Lu Wen, gradually emitting waves of faint light. Then, they transformed into the silhouette of a dragon. Lu Wen raised his hand again, and a shadow flew out from his sleeve. It was Ji Yunan's old friend, the space dragon named Long 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 who had originally been perched on Lu Wen's shoulder, hid in his sleeve this time, only appearing now. After she soared into the sky, she rapidly drew close to the dragon silhouette. At this moment, the silhouette also quickly solidified, forming a new giant dragon. Space and time twin dragons. Ju Po gazed at the scene in the sky and could not help but sigh. It really is him. As Ju Po spoke, Lu Wen slowly closed his eyes. His body also began to float in mid-air, gradually fusing with the space and time twin dragons. As the space dragon, Long Long was born from Lu Wen's comprehension, and the new time dragon was also born from Lu Wen. They could be said to be of the same origin. Now, the three were actually gradually fusing together. Just like that, Lu Wen sat cross-legged in mid-air, while the space and time twin dragons gradually fused into his body. In the end, they formed a strange pattern between his brows. This was a pattern formed by two giant dragons, one black and one white, intertwining together. It was like a diagonal diagram of the yin-yang diagram, and it was filled with a wondrous aura. So it's you. Yu Lian's figure had already appeared at some point in time, and her gaze towards Lu Wen was strangely familiar. Who is he? Ji Yunan did not know who he was, so he asked Yu Lian shamelessly. According to seniority, I should call him senior granduncle. Yu Lian sighed. He was once my Dong Shu's traitor. Lu Wen smiled as he continued Yu Lian's words. He wore a black and white daoist robe, and a seven-starred daoist crown on his head. He clasped his hands towards Ji Yunan. Chapter 509. Reading. Time record. Ji Yunan, Ju Po, and Lu Wen all sat down. The former two looked the same as before, while only Lu Wen maintained his previous attire. The black and white daoist robe, the seven-star daoist crown, and the twin dragon yin-yang symbol between his eyebrows made Lu Wen look extremely handsome, as if he was not an ordinary person. So, are you going to continue to be this showy in the future? Ji Yunan asked as he looked at Lu Wen. Lu Wen was already used to Ji Yunan's style, and smiled without any surprise. This is my original appearance. As for what Yu Lian has, it's just what she thinks. Original appearance. Ji Yunan raised his eyebrows. Previous life. Lu Wen revealed an amused smile. You know which previous life I'm talking about. Of course Ji Yunan knew. The martial granduncle that Yu Lian spoke of was the former traitor of Dong Shu, the disciple of the second-generation sage, the yin-yang daoist. According to Yu Lian's knowledge, Lu Wen was clearly the reincarnation of the yin-yang daoist. But from Lu Wen's words, his current attire was not that of the yin-yang daoist, but from his real previous life, the crack world. There were cultivators in the crack world, there was no doubt about that. Even a technological civilization like the Blue Planet could develop a basic cultivation system like the Origin Force after a few hundred years of development. It was naturally more normal for a cultivation civilization to exist. Ji Yunan, Ju Po, and Huang Quan Daoist all clearly came from a technological civilization. The latter two only knew a little of their history, so they did not have much of an advantage. Ji Yunan, on the other hand, had an evil god's temple and a highly realistic game, which gave him the experience of cultivation. His advantage was already far greater than the other two. And now there was Lu Wen, who seemed to have been a cultivator in his previous life. In my previous life, I stood at the edge of Dao integration, but because I tried to combine two great Daos, I died from Dao punishment. Lu Wen shook his head lightly. No wonder he could reach this step so easily, and was so familiar with the law of space and time. It seemed like he was really the reincarnation of a supreme being. A strange look appeared in Ji Yunan's eyes. That world can also reach this level. Did you not notice the abnormality of the world? Even an ordinary Star Lord would be able to roam the entire spatial rift, let alone someone at the brink of Dao integration. All they needed was enough time. We call that place the original realm. As a starry sky plane, the original realm itself is sufficiently vast, and sealed off. Lu Wen looked at Ji Yunan and Ju Po and said, in my previous world, there were people who had fused the Dao in the civilization. They were also known as saints. But even the saints have never seen the world outside the original realm. Ji Yunan's eyes began to show some understanding. According to this method, the great cosmos that the Blue Planet was in his previous life would be the original realm that Lu Wen had mentioned. There was a cultivation civilization here, and there were even experts at the path integration realm. However, it was completely isolated from the outside world. Ji Yunan did not doubt this because he had seen with his own eyes the bit wall between the original realm and the outside world. It was so powerful that even he could not break through it directly. He could only descend through a wisp of his will. Based on Ji Yunan's limited knowledge from his previous life, the universe where the blue planet was located was indeed larger than most of the dimensions. Even the astral world and the Milky Way, which were also starry skyplanes, could not compare to the original realm in terms of actual size. Then how did you get out? Ji Yunan looked at Lu Wen and asked. With Lu Wen's cultivation at that time, he should not have been completely unaware of the process of leaving the original realm. Lu Wen began to reveal a bitter smile. He turned to look at Ju Po, indicating for him to explain this question. And Ju Po did not refuse, sighing and saying, under the calamity, just as his soul was about to be destroyed, he was rescued by someone. I have always suspected that it was Yellow Spring, but he never admitted it. Lu Wen also nodded and said, back then, I also could not tell who did it. But looking at the time, it is indeed fellow Yellow Spring who is most likely. Ji Yunan began to frown. When he combined the information from Ju Po, Lu Wen, and Yellow Spring Daoist, it gave him a strange feeling. He felt as if something was missing. Ju Po said that Yellow Spring Daoist went to search for his hometown and disappeared without a trace. He had never seen him again. Lu Wen called his hometown the original realm, but he did not come to the two worlds naturally. Instead, he was rescued by someone, and the time matched with Yellow Spring's disappearance. And Yellow Spring Daoist called the original realm the Crack World. This was because he had indeed found the location of the original realm. It was right in the crack between the two worlds. What Ju Po said should be true. If he knew the location of the original realm, there was no need for him to waste words with him. He could have gone straight to Yellow Spring. The only possibility was that he still did not know where his hometown was. He had only determined Ji Yunan's origins, and from some of his strange actions, he had found out that Ji Yunan might have met Yellow Spring Daoist. In reality, if not for the fact that the world of gods did not match the game's history, Ji Yunan would not have been able to follow the clues and find Yellow Spring Daoist in the crack. And there was one thing that Ji Yunan did not understand. If Yellow Spring Daoist had really rescued Lu Wen, why would he deny it? And why would he let Lu Wen fall into Ju Po's hands? But if it was not Yellow Spring's doing, could it be that there was someone from the same hometown? Several thoughts circled around in Ji Yunan's mind. He did not speak for a moment, and just sank into deep thought. Lu Wen and Ju Po did not disturb him. Seeing that he had made some decisions, Lu Wen said, the matter of the original realm is in the past. Ji Yunan, if you can meet Yellow Spring Daoist and take care of a few old friends for me, that will be enough. All right. Ji Yunan thought for a moment, and finally nodded. If there was a chance, he really did want to return to the original realm to take a look. This was not a simple exchange with Fu Cheng, but a true dissent of his will. Then, next is the most important matter. Ju Po finally stood up and said with a smile. Is what happened just now not important? Ji Yunan asked, pursing his lips. What happened next is more important, Ju Po said seriously. Fan Lun is dead, and war is inevitable. It might even affect those at the level of path integration. Ji Yunan, if you want to act against the Master God, we can help. Ji Yunan raised his head to look at Ju Po, and then looked at Lu Wen. What are the conditions? He did not believe that these two would help out of the kindness of their hearts. There must be a reason for everyone to do something. Ju Po smiled and said, if we ask you to tell us the whereabouts of Yellow Spring, you will most likely not be willing. I'm afraid that we will not be able to completely trust you. As long as the time is right, you can stand on our side. From his words, Ji Yunan could hear the bloodthirst that seeped deep into his bones. He could not help but smile faintly. You want to become enemies with the entire universe? I want to go home. There was no expression on Ju Po's face. I have already been a path integration practitioner for tens of thousands of years. I am tired. I just want to go home and take a look. Chapter 510. Reading. When Ji Yunan reappeared in the Divine Kingdom, it was already 3 days after he left the timeline. He believed that Ju Po was telling the truth. If there was no Netherworld Taoist, and he didn't know that there was someone who came from the same place as him, perhaps Ju Po could have stayed in the various worlds and become one of his great ancient powers. Unfortunately, Netherworld Taoist went to find his hometown, and Ju Po didn't choose to go with him until he found Zero, Lu Wen, and Ji Yunan. If we kill all the main gods and Tao fusing masters of the two worlds and combine the power of the two worlds, maybe we can break the bit wall? Ji Yunan touched his chin and thought for a while. He began to agree with this plan. A normal person would probably think of allying with the existing unification masters to find and develop the original realm together. But Ju Po, who came up with this plan, was obviously not a normal person, and Ji Yunan, who accepted it, was even less so. Let's give it a try. Next. Lorenza. Ji Yunan looked at the stack of information on the table. It was all about a person's experiences over the years. This person's name was Dong Zun. The world of gods. 13 main gods. Oh, there were only 12 main gods left now. They gathered together again and discussed Fan Lun's death. We can't pretend that nothing happened. Eugene, the Lord of War, slammed the table. This time it was Fan Lun. Who will it be next? Then what do you think we should do? Daisy, the Lady of Darkness, looked at him with a smile. Kill them, Eugene said without hesitation. Austin also spoke at this time. The mastermind of this is Lu Wen. He has been planning to kill Fan Lun for a long time. Sven, the god of time, is his clone. Ji Yunan and the other two acted too quickly. The other main gods couldn't even get to the scene in time and didn't understand the situation at the time. After listening to Austin's narration, they realized that the other party had hidden a clone and attacked Fan Lun in such an unpredictable way. Is there another evil god involved? Koche, the Lord of Nightmares, said in a low voice. He had personally been to many worlds and witnessed Ji Yunan's strangeness and strength, so he couldn't help but say, the evil god's growth is too fast, we don't have time to drag this on. If it was just Van Lun's death, the dark gods wouldn't have enough reason to make a move. However, if the evil god was involved, no one would be able to stay out of it. After a moment of silence, Lady of Darkness Daisy finally said, then, let's start an all-out war. Reality had proven that no provocation was more provocative than directly killing a main god. Starting an all-out war meant that the light and darkness god systems had started to set aside all of their disputes and start a war with the core gods as the vanguard. But ever since the ancient times when the two worlds had interacted with one another, there had never been such a large-scale and high-level exchange of fire. In the past, the two sides did not have much of a conflict of interest, and killing the other side would not bring them any benefits. This caused the war to lack motivation. However, things were different now. The gods were not fighting for benefits, but for their own survival. If the fusing masters of the various worlds were allowed to continue like this, sooner or later, the lords of the Pantheon world would die one by one, and in the end, an all-out invasion would come. And once the core gods took the lead, the gods did not hesitate at all. Immediately, a large number of gods decided to participate in the war. The aftermath of Operation Hunt the gods had not yet passed. Come to think of it, this was all Ji Yunan's fault. The Pantheon world had finally started an all-out war. Wave after wave of god armies surged into the various worlds, their targets being the astral realms of the astral lords. When the gods decided to launch a large-scale invasion, one of the disadvantages of the various worlds was finally revealed. Unlike the god kingdoms that were completely chosen by the gods, the astral lords' astral realms were essentially natural planes of existence. That was why god kingdoms could be built in very remote locations, but the astral lords' astral realms could only adjust their positions slightly, and traces could always be found. In the short span of 3 days since the start of the war, the unprepared worlds had suffered a great loss. Many astral realms had been destroyed by the gods, and the astral lords had lost their foundations. 1,000 years of hard work had been destroyed in a day. The last time the two worlds had started a war, the battlefield was actually in the Pantheon world. It was a war between the gods and the invaders, and the astral lords had never experienced such heartache. When they understood the inside story behind the start of the war, it was not that no one secretly blamed Lu Wen and the others. However, when they found out that Ji Yunan was also involved, not many people said anything more. Your reputation among the astral lords is much greater than that of us old fellows. Li Si smiled as he spoke to Ji Yunan during the meeting of the fusing masters on the various worlds side. Ji Yunan pursed his lips and said, The more you kill, the better your reputation will be. Li Si did not know how to respond to this kind of person who could chat to death. He could only set his gaze on Monk Fa Kong, who was sitting on the other side. In the face of the Pantheon world's invasion, the 16 fusing masters naturally had to gather and discuss a feasible strategy. This time, it was Yu Lian who had issued the invitation, inviting the 16 fusing masters to the Paradise Realm. No matter what their relationship was, it was inevitable that they would meet. Naturally, the 4 who had surrounded and killed Ji Yunan 5 years ago were also present. Among them, Song Fei and Hua Kuei had suffered losses. Meng Xian had paid a heavy price, while Monk Fa Kong had suffered a great loss. Not only had the sealed nomological laws been useless, but Ji Yunan had also turned the tables on them. More than half of the monks in the 3 Buddha temple had died in the aftermath of the fusing masters' battle. Amitabha. However, Monk Fa Kong was a fusing masters after all, and his ability to maintain his composure was not just for show. Benefactor Ji Yunan, we meet again. Ji Yunan looked at him and said, "Do you still want me to stay at your house?" The corners of Monk Fa Kong's mouth twitched slightly. No matter how well-mannered he was, he did not know how to respond to Ji Yunan's face-slapping behavior. In fact, it was quite common for fusing masters to attack each other, or even to join forces with others to fight. It was just like how Song Fei had tricked Zhu Jiming back then, and Song Fei had secretly attacked Elder Zi Luo. As long as there was no absolute gap between them, this kind of thing was limited to the stage of seeking revenge. It was rare for them to want to kill each other. That was because if the 2 sides had to fight, not to mention anything else, the 2 astral realms would definitely not be able to survive. It would only end in a lose-lose situation. Monk Fa Kong had tricked people before, and he had also been tricked by others. However, he had never seen Ji Yunan so keen on face-slapping. Fortunately, Li Si helped him out. "Everyone is here. Let's get down to business first." Yu Lian, who was sitting above, also said, "The battle is imminent. No one can stay out of this matter. Now, please put aside your prejudices and unite against the outside world." Ji Yunan was the first to reply. "No problem. I can go and kill a master god first." His relaxed tone of killing a master god like killing a chicken caught everyone's attention. "Are you confident?" Yu Lian looked at him and asked, "Who are you going to kill?" Chapter 511. Read. "You really want to make a move on Eugene? It's fake. Then what's your real target?" "None of your business." The above conversation took place after the meeting between Zhu Jiming and Ji Yunan, who were adept at getting close to each other. Zhu Jiming, who could easily get close to anyone, seemed to have hit a wall with Ji Yunan. But Zhu Jiming did not seem to mind, or perhaps he was already used to such situations. Unable to obtain more information from Ji Yunan, he could just leave with a smile, and had no intention of continuing to pester him. There were not many disputes or conflicts in this meeting between the 16. Even though this matter had arisen because of Lu Wen and Ji Yunan, this battle was unavoidable. This was something that everyone understood. There was no point in discussing responsibility at this time. This meeting was more about strengthening their resolve to face the external threat as well as formulating their next plan. But any plan seemed insignificant in the face of Ji Yunan's "I'll kill one first." Since Ji Yunan had this confidence, the group of fused path practitioners did not mind cooperating with him. After all, if the operation was ultimately unsuccessful, it would be Ji Yunan who would lose face. It would only cause his words to be ignored in the future, and they would not suffer any real losses. In the Journal of Time, when Ji Yunan, Lu Wen, and Zhu Po sat together again, the topic of discussion was naturally Ji Yunan's. "Do you think that one of us will secretly contact the Pantheon world?" Lu Wen asked. He subconsciously felt that Eugene, the target that Ji Yunan had mentioned, was unreliable. Whether in terms of difficulty or strength, Eugene was not the best choice at the moment. In the war between the 2 worlds, Eugene would definitely be the overall commander of the battle formation. There was no doubt about this. To put it bluntly, as long as the war began, he would not leave Austin even half a step. Even if he had to personally enter the battlefield, he would first ensure his own safety. If they could kill Eugene, it would certainly deal a heavy blow to the Pantheon world and cause the entire war system to come to a standstill, but the difficulty was undoubtedly extremely high. There were so many targets that could be targeted, why would they choose the most difficult one? Even if there's no one, we still have to find someone to leak this information. Ji Nan said, even if we know that it might be a diversion, so what? How dare they not guard against Eugene's ambush? Ji Nan took a sip of the green tea on the table. Old Lu, you don't understand what kind of existence the evil gods are in the eyes of these gods. They even believe that I can destroy the world. What else can't they believe? That does make sense. Lu Wen gently stroked the short beard on his chin. He didn't really understand how the sovereigns thought either. At the very least, based on his interactions with Ji Nan, the latter was not a person with self-destructive tendencies. On the contrary, he was excessively rational. In Lu Wen's eyes, as long as Ji Nan made a decision, it would definitely be beneficial to him. For this, he could disregard all morals and rules. Sometimes others thought his actions inconceivable, but in the end he was proved to be right. It was just that at first others could not see some things. Ji Nan looked at Ju Po and said, arrange for the person to leak the information. I need to find someone in the 16 kilometers, someone who has no relationship with me on the surface, to do something for me. No problem. Ju Po immediately nodded. He had operated in the various worlds for tens of thousands of years, and the current 16 Starlords were basically all his juniors. There were many like Song Fei who he had invested in and had a good relationship with, but many people didn't know about them. If Song Fei hadn't caused such a huge impact on old man Zi Luo back then, he probably wouldn't have been remembered until now. Within Ji Nan's divine kingdom, he was sitting comfortably in the evil god's palace, waiting for the person Ju Po had arranged to arrive. After harvesting Fan Lun's Sin value, he had taken a big step towards the 13th level. Of course, if he wanted to count on the blasphemer plan, he would still have to wait for a long time. This would take at least 10 to 20 years, and this was after considering the expansion of the sovereign's space and the increase in efficiency. But in reality, with the start of the war between the two worlds, a large number of gods had already fallen, and the blasphemer plan was just meat on a mosquito's leg. It was better than nothing. I still have to rely on the main gods. Ji Nan was very clear about his situation. In the future, every main god would be incomparably precious, and he definitely couldn't let them die at the hands of others. Otherwise, he might end up like the main gods he had nurtured himself. 4 main gods and Tao-fusing cultivators, the level was not too important. At most, it would affect the upper limit of their power. But what really determined combat power was more the nature of the rules and actual fighting methods, and there were many cases of using a single point to break through. In any case, with the astral world and divine kingdom, everyone's power was almost limitless. But Ji Nan was different. His level would affect the strength of his evil god body, and this determined how long he could last in front of the enemy. As for the change in attack power, it didn't mean much, since it would only be a punch if he hit. Teacher, someone's. Yang's voice was slightly anxious. Clearly, this person had not entered through the normal route, but had directly barged into the evil god's palace. It's fine. Ji Nan waved his hand. This was the person that Ju Po had recommended. Inside the evil god's palace, a travel-worn figure appeared in front of Ji Nan. This was a graceful young girl in a light green dress, and there was a strange pattern drawn on her face, giving her a demonic aura. Apart from Yu Lian and Dream Immortal, this was the only female Tao-fusing cultivator in the 16 high school, Qingkong Mu Chishuang. Ji Nan had met every single one of them in the 16 high school. He only had a simple understanding of some of them, while he had a deeper impression of some of them, and Mu Chishuang belonged to the latter. The reason why Ji Nan had a deep impression of her was that she was a Tao-fusing cultivator with a very special law. This law was so special that even Ji Nan had never seen it before, and perhaps it had never appeared in the entire world of gods. It was a law unique to all worlds. Ginseng was the name of Mu Chishuang's law. Mu Chishuang could communicate with the Tao of any world. Her cultivation was to constantly understand and communicate with the various planes until she grasped every single detail of them. However, There were not that many planes in the world of gods, and a man-made god nation could not be easily touched by others. Naturally, there was no such law. Ju Po, do you need my help? Mu Qishuang asked directly after exchanging some pleasantries with Ji Yunan. That's right. Ji Yunan nodded and said, I need you to help me nurture a person so that he can advance to Tier 5 as soon as possible. It would be best if he could join the Gods Guild and go to the world of gods. As he spoke, Ji Yunan handed over all the information regarding Dongzun to Mu Qishuang. Chapter 512. Read. The Gods' Union had helped a lot when Lorenza became a Lord God. Even Ji Yunan himself had participated in the process. As the first leader god to cross 2 worlds and become a leader god, Lorenza's leveling up process was like crossing a river by feeling the stones. Even the God Union had no experience with this. To ensure absolute secrecy, Lorenza chose to break up her god soul. She gave it to the God Union's members to smuggle it to other worlds. During this process, Ji Yunan hid a piece and used it to create a chess piece. That was Dongzun. Losing a small part of her god soul did not affect Lorenza. She might not have even noticed it. But when this was used by someone with ulterior motives, the whole thing became uncontrollable. In the blue sky. Dongzun. Mister, this person is. You do not need to know who he is. Just follow what is written here. Yes, Mister. Mu Qishuang watched her people leave. She looked at the file on the table. She had read Dongzun's information at least 10 times, but she could not find anything wrong. Mu Qishuang was not stupid. Ji Yunan was going to attack Eugene, but he was using the 9 spirits to find her, who was not related to him. His goal was not simple. But Dongzun's experience was nothing special. He was just a normal person in a normal world. He had a lucky encounter, and now, he had break-world power. Although his progress was a bit fast, considering the existence of the reincarnation system, it was not rare. Perhaps the key was that he had a lucky encounter. But she could not cut Dongzun open to see. She had to wait for him to reveal himself. While Mu Qishuang was thinking about Dongzun's history, Dongzun was standing inside the purple net. He curiously looked around. Dongzun had become break-world class not long ago, but he had been staying in the original world. He had been busy dealing with the consequences of his past. In some worlds, breaking the world was like ascending. Many people thought after ascending to become a fairy, they could not come back. So, they had to take care of things. When Dongzun ascended to some major planes, he found that it was not the case at all. He started to understand the nature of this world. He understood the relationship between all the big planes. He gradually understood how to break the world. However, Dongzun still couldn't find any clues about the origin of the voice in his head or the mysterious person he had seen. With Dongzun's current abilities, he didn't have the qualifications to investigate too much. He could only ensure that he could survive. As the most renowned neutral plane, the Purple Luo tribe was already extremely renowned. After Elder Purple Luo progressed to the Dao integration stage and forcefully took over the entire Purple Luo tribe, its fame only increased. Although Old Man Z Luo's methods were powerful, he wasn't someone who would suppress the various large organizations. On the contrary, as long as they were willing to cooperate, they would receive better benefits and treatment. In any case, it was better to have a Dao integration stage cultivator as his backer than to rely on himself. To put it simply, Violet Net had transformed from a loose organization platform into a large-scale organization with a unified plan and a complete organizational structure. The absolute core of this organization was undoubtedly the Gods Union. This is the Gods Union, a young girl said to Dongzun. However, if you want to join the Gods Union, it will be very difficult. Dongzun only smiled. I will do my best. The girl shrugged her shoulders and said non-committally, then I'll wait for you outside. You should be waiting for my triumphant return. Dongzun smiled peacefully. He was like a completely different person from his crazy and stubborn self in the past. If one hadn't seen Dongzun in the past, they probably wouldn't have connected the two of them. The two of them parted ways. Dongzun walked toward the Gods Union, while the young girl turned around and walked toward the back. There was already a green-robed man waiting there. I have done what you wanted me to do. Where is the item? The young girl asked as she stared at the green-robed man. The green-robed man took out a box and handed it to the young girl. 2 ghost spirit fruit seeds. Relax. Our organization won't miss out on such a small reward. The man's words were very honest. No matter what, he was a trusted subordinate of a Dao integration stage cultivator. He wouldn't miss out on the resources of a world breaker. Plus, if it wasn't for the young girl named Qi Ji, it would have been difficult to get Dongzun to join the Gods Union. The task given to them by their superiors was too urgent. They didn't have time to set things up. They had to start with the people around Dongzun. Fortunately, they discovered Dongzun had someone like Qi Ji. She had a high desire for practice resources. She didn't mind doing something for them. Come and talk. The green-robed man smiled. What do you think of Dongzun? What do you mean? Qi Ji lifted her lips. His power isn't bad. He is dumb and easy to trick. That's all. The green-robed man nodded and said, there will be opportunities like this in the future. Stay with Dongzun. Do you understand? Qi Ji no longer doubted the man's wealth. She rolled her eyes and asked, who is Dongzun? Why do you want to set him up like this? That is not something you should know. The green-robed man pushed the table and stood up. His body quickly disappeared from Qi Ji's sight. Qi Ji lifted her lips. She looked away and waited for Dongzun to return. When she first met Dongzun, she was already a world breaker. She even helped Dongzun before he leveled up. That was how the two of them got to know each other. Back then, Qi Ji had only done it casually. Now, it seemed like Dongzun was a big treasure waiting for her to discover. Should I use this chance to get close to him? Qi Ji's head spun with the idea, but she quickly dismissed it. She needed to figure out why this mysterious organization wanted to lead Dongzun. If they wanted to do something, she would be dragged into it as well. Qi Ji shook her head. As Dongzun followed Blue Sky's guidance and walked the path that Ji Yunan had designed for him, Ji Yunan arrived at the border of the 2 worlds. His destination was the world of gods, but at the border, he ran into someone he didn't expect. Are you going to do something? Yu Lian seemed to have been waiting there for a while. She looked at Ji Yunan and said, your real target isn't Eugene, right? There were many people who guessed that Ji Yunan was blind, but there weren't many people like Yu Lian who could figure out Ji Yunan's path and wait for him to confirm it. Chapter 513. Read. This god's hatred for the evil gods originated from their fear. Fear that the evil gods possessed too much power and strange methods that would destroy the entire world. The gods' belief in the ancient legends and their reverence for mysticism made them emphasize the terror and power of the evil gods, even if they ignored their experience. In other words, it was better to believe than to risk the destruction of the world. In the world of gods, this kind of thinking would cause Ji Yunan a lot of trouble. But in the world where the 2 worlds coexisted, it became a point that he could take advantage of. When Ji Yunan announced that he was going to target a main god, all the main gods had to be mobilized. No one dared to underestimate him. The words that Ji Yunan had released during the meeting had already reached the ears of the main gods, but the authenticity of the news could not be confirmed. Since the fusing gods could not come here personally, it would take some time to confirm the news. But the protective measures for Eugene had already been taken. Eugene sat at the rear of the gods' world and directly mobilized the various armies. This allowed the gods' power to be united and unleash 120% of their power. Austin had left a clone here for a long time. If anything happened, he could rush back at any time. In fact, every main god had the will of a top main god watching over them to prevent them from being defeated by the enemy. The light god system had Austin, the Lord of Light and Justice, and Boswell, the Master of Ashen Green. The darkness god system had Lady of Darkness, Daisy, and Death god, Baya. The Master of Ashen Green was the oldest main god and could be called a living fossil among the gods. The Death god was not old, but his laws were special. He could be considered one of the main gods with the strongest combat power. Austin was currently out, and Boswell was by Eugene's side. The Master of Ashen Green was dressed in a dark blue robe and held a wooden staff that was taller than a person. He had a long beard and white hair, and even his eyebrows were white. Eugene was still constantly issuing orders and directing the frontline battle. But his efficiency was lower than usual, and he often hesitated. "Relax." Boswell lightly tapped the staff in his hand and said to Eugene, "The evil gods must be destroyed, and they will be destroyed." Eugene let out a long sigh. He did not deny that it was the evil god's words that gave him pressure, but he knew that it was not fear, but caution. If he forced himself to look down on the evil god because of the existence of the evil god, then he would really be affected. "Sir Boswell, are evil gods really that scary?" Eugene couldn't help but ask the doubt in his heart when there was no one around. It was normal for Eugene to use honorifics on the Pale Azure King, given his strength and experience. It was impossible for the sovereigns to not have any suspicions about the heretical god's tomb. Just like what I said before, this was a mindset that one would rather believe in. Among the gods, no one would doubt Eugene's words. Only someone as knowledgeable as the Pale Azure Master would ask such a question. He originally thought that Boswell would quote the classics and use various ways to prove the power or cruelty of the evil gods, but the latter only said one sentence. "Yes." Boswell just nodded. Never underestimate the power of the Diawolos. At the rear of the Pantheon world, the old Boswell stood in front of Eugene. His incomparably confident expression shocked the latter. "I understand." Eugene nodded solemnly. He had completely reined in his perverse nature and was dealing with this with the utmost caution. However, just as Eugene made up his mind, an aura began to appear beside the two of them. "He's here." The Pale Azure King's voice stopped abruptly. The staff in his hand was already pointed at a certain corner, and a green beam of light directly hit Ji-Yunan out. The oldest god in the world, the Pale Azure King's rank was roughly between the 14th and 15th rank. However, if they were to fight, Austin dared not have absolute confidence in winning. If Ji-Yunan was at the 15th rank, he would have some confidence. Unfortunately, he was currently only at the 12th rank. The suppression of rank caused his shadow precept to lose its top-notch concealment ability, and he was unable to launch a sneak attack. "Boswell." Ji-Yunan's gaze landed on the Pale Azure King, and he could not help but smile. "I didn't expect that even you would come out." The Pale Azure King and the Demon King Stanley. These two old farts had always been the most mysterious among the main gods, and they would not easily appear in front of others. Unexpectedly, even Boswell had come out this time. The Pale Azure King had no intention of wasting time with Ji-Yunan. He waved the staff in his hand again, and a pale azure light began to envelop the entire hall. At the same time that Ji-Yunan appeared, the aura of holy light also appeared, and the holy sword once again descended on Ji-Yunan's head. Austin had arrived. These main gods did not give Ji-Yunan any chance at all. In the blink of an eye, Austin had arrived, and it was no longer possible for Ji-Yunan to kill Eugene. Ji-Yunan did not hesitate at all, and his figure instantly disappeared. This time, even the Pale Azure King was unable to determine his location. Austin scanned the area with his holy light, and when he did not find any trace of Ji-Yunan, he immediately said, "He escaped. He has someone else in mind." The main gods were not fools. Ji-Yunan's sudden appearance and disappearance undoubtedly meant that he had other intentions, and it was most likely that he had another target. Right at this moment, Austin's eyes suddenly flickered, and he quickly disappeared. Daphne. Ji-Yunan's sudden appearance at the front line of the battlefield where the goddess of nature Daphne was, gave the two main gods a fright. Daphne was one of the main gods who had personally arrived on the battlefield, and her current opponent was Qin Guanruo. The two types of laws of life and death quickly alternated, and the entire sky was dyed in two colors. When Ji-Yunan suddenly appeared, Daphne was shocked, and she quickly retreated. This was not the first time that she had encountered a gank during a normal battle. After all, not all the main gods and Tao integration stage beings were ready to reveal themselves, and Ji-Yunan was not the only one who could think of concentrating their firepower to kill a single person. Daphne's retreat was very timely, but Ji-Yunan's movements were even faster. Almost in the instant that he appeared, his fist had already landed on Daphne's head. However, this was different from the sneak attack on Van Lun. This time, Daphne could maintain the highest level of vigilance. When Ji-Yunan attacked, she had already set up a nomological barrier. Even though the barrier was instantly destroyed by Ji Yunan's fist, it had still bought her some time, and she had a chance to retreat. More importantly, with Daphne's momentary delay, the holy light arrived again. After being toyed with by Ji Yunan several times, Austen seemed to be angry. Chapter 5:14. Read. Torrential holy light descended and engulfed the entire battlefield. Qin Guan frowned slightly. He had seen how terrifying Austen was, and his own laws were slightly restrained by the holy light. It was not appropriate for him to stay now. Hence, Qin Guan did not choose to stay for long. He also quickly hid himself, but he did not leave immediately. Instead, he observed the situation. In any case, Ji Yunan was considered a member of the various worlds, and Qin Guan could not sit back and watch him be killed. However, to his surprise, Ji Yunan did not seem to be affected by the holy light that he could not resist at all. He took a bath in the holy light before turning around and leaving leisurely. After Ji Yunan's aura completely disappeared, Daphne could not help but say in shock, "He got away?" She clearly did not know enough about the characteristics of Ji Yunan's shadow law. In fact, after reaching the 12th tier, the evolution of the laws made it harder for Ji Yunan to be found. This was also the reason why he dared to do this. "It's shadow," Austen said in a deep voice. In the past, Ji Yunan's level was too low, and his enemies often focused on his evil god body and neglected the special characteristics of his shadow law. Now, someone finally realized it. Light and shadow were two sides of the same coin. Even his younger sister was a shadow law user, so Austen understood the special characteristics of shadow very well. This was not a law that was good at attacking, but its concealment and lurking ability were far better than other laws. Austen did not have time to say anything. He disappeared again because Ji Yunan had already gone to find his next target. It was Eugene again. At the rear, Eugene, who had just heaved a sigh of relief because Ji Yunan had been chased away, finally faced Ji Yunan's all-out attack. This time, he did not greet Boswell, and he punched with all his might. The Lord of Pale Cyan reacted extremely quickly. Light instantly enveloped Eugene's body, at least preventing him from being killed by Ji Yunan's punch. However, Ji Yunan's target suddenly changed to himself. Boswell was flung away. Fortunately, he was not completely without the protection of laws, so he was not killed by Ji Yunan in a single blow. The holy light appeared again, and Austen's expression was a little cold. He moved very quickly this time. It was as if the holy sword had eyes, and it landed in the position where Ji Yunan was about to go. However, Ji Yunan did not dodge, and let the sword hit him. Half of his body was instantly destroyed. Countless holy flames invaded his body, as if they were going to completely burn his internal organs. However, Ji Yunan only laughed and disappeared again. He had used the power of the shadow law to the extreme. The evil god's body had recovered in the blink of an eye. Austen's eyes were slightly cold. He didn't wait for Ji Yunan to take his place and rushed to Daphne's side in advance. But this time, Ji Yunan's gaze changed again. Lorenza and Daphne could be said to be the two weakest among the main gods, so Austen didn't have any doubts about Ji Yunan's choice. However, he was a little slower this time. It was because he knew that there would be someone else helping him this time. Lorenza's punch landed on the top of his head, but a sickle appeared at the same time, blocking the path of Ji Yunan's punch, causing his punch to fail. Ever since Ji Yunan had completed his second job transition, this was the first time someone had used the power of laws to block his punch. Evil God! A young man in a grey cloak, with grey hair and beard, walked out slowly from Lorenza's side, sizing up Ji Yunan with a cold gaze. Death God Baya. The Death God was also a god that had gone through several generations. Just like the god of knowledge, almost every generation was stronger than the previous one. It was because the more living things that died in this world, the more powerful the Death God would be. This was the case for generations. Faced with the appearance of the Death God, Ji Yunan only pursed his lips and revealed a mocking expression. He did not intend to stay for long either, and disappeared once again under the shadow ripples. No one could catch him, who had the law of shadows, and similarly, no one could instantly kill his evil god body. This meant that Ji Yunan could be active behind the enemy's back alone, and he had nothing to fear. But now, there were only 4 people left from the light gods, and 8 from the darkness gods. Could they defend? Ji Yunan's figure flickered, and he once again hid in the shadows. When he looked back at the battlefield again, he felt like laughing. He suddenly realized that whenever the gods of the darkness gods appeared on the battlefield, they would always be in groups of 2. There would not even be a situation where there were more than 2 groups. It was obvious that the Dark God System's members had seen him pulling back and forth a few times, so they were prepared. Not to let the 2 main gods protect each other, but to make it easier for the Lady of Darkness and the Death God to keep an eye on them, so that they could rush to the battlefield at the first instance. Interesting. Ji Yunan smiled, and then turned to return to the various worlds. He had already made the world of gods afraid to show up too much, and at the same time, he had distracted the main gods. He had achieved his goal. Ziluo. You did it. You really did it. Qiji's eyes widened, and she looked at Dongzun with a shocked expression. Dongzun seemed to enjoy Qiji's expression. He had always been gentle, but now he looked very pleased. Of course, in reality, Qiji knew that Dongzun would definitely succeed. The mysterious organization had spent so much effort to guide Dongzun into the God Society. How could they let him fail? But Qiji's expression did not change. She continued to look surprised, and she tried to probe the mysterious organization's new movements. Now that you have joined the God Society, does the organization have any missions for you? Qiji asked. There is one. Dongzun nodded and frowned. So the God Society is a joint organization between the 2 worlds. The first mission is for me to go to the world of gods. The world of gods? Qiji looked confused. This time, she was not faking it. She was really confused. The structure of the 2 worlds was actually quite vague to normal world breakers. Dongzun had only just found out that the world was like this in the God Society, and the first mission that the organization had given him was to go there and kill a target. After listening to Dongzun's description and knowing what the world of gods was like, Qiji could not help but say, that must be very far. Why don't I go with you? Really? Dongzun looked pleasantly surprised. He really wanted Qiji to go with him, but he did not know how to bring it up. Really? Qiji nodded firmly, without a hint of hesitation. This was because just now, a voice had mysteriously rung in her ear. If you go with him, you can get double the reward. Chapter 5:15. Read. New. Flower. Is that you, Flower? Don't call me Flower. The consciousness that had just woken up spoke slowly. Its voice sounded weak. Dongzun looked surprised. He was staying in a hotel. It was rare for him to have some time alone, so he immediately called out to the being in his head. The wisp of soul that called itself Blossoming Flower had, in fact, been forced to overdraft its own strength in an accident during Dongzun's growth. It had already fallen into a deep sleep. When Dongzun reached the break-world level, his power was enough to feed the God Soul. Only then did the flower remnant gradually wake up. Dongzun, on the other hand, was very happy about Hua's awakening. After communicating with the other party, he told the blooming flower remnant soul about his experiences during this period of time. God's union. The God's world. The flower remnant sounded confused. In my memory, that place seems to be related to my origin. Maybe you can see my real body there. Your real body? Dongzun said with difficulty. If this remnant soul that had accompanied him saw the real body, would it be taken back? As if reading Dongzun's mind, the flower remnant soul smiled and said, right now, I am just myself. I have no connection with the real body. If you can reach that step, maybe we can replace her. After Lorenza disintegrated her own soul and successfully reassembled it, this extra divine soul was no longer connected to her original body. Even the memories she obtained were pitifully small. Her memories of her main body also stopped at the level of the 10th level. If she knew that Lorenza had become a Lord God, she would not have thought like this. What's your mission this time? The flower remnant soul asked. After understanding the God's union situation, she suddenly cared about this question. Dongzun did not hesitate and immediately said, they want me to kill a target. I will only know the specific information when I get there. It was not common to not tell the mission information in advance. Considering that Dongzun had just joined the organization, and they had never been in contact with an organization like the Gods Union, the two of them had no objections. Dongzun was eager to try. He could not wait to complete the mission and get the reward from the organization. An organization like Gods Union gave its members mission rewards. Dongzun, who was a world breaker from a plane, was shocked. This was only his reward for being an outer member. After all, the official members of the Gods Guild were all gods and star lords. The flowery remnant soul was silent for a long time, as if it was pondering Dongzun's overall experience. Then, it said, "Don't you feel that the process of this system is too smooth?" These words caused Dongzun to be slightly stunned. Recently, he did feel that things were going smoothly, but it was also the result of his hard work, so he didn't feel anything. On the other hand, the blooming flower remnant soul was a bystander. As soon as he heard Dongzun's description, he felt that there was something wrong. Dongzun attached great importance to the blossom remnant soul's opinion. After careful consideration, he couldn't help but say, "You're right. I'll have to ask for Elder Tang's opinion before the mission begins." Early the next morning, Dongzun put aside his quest and informed Qi Ji that he planned to return to Black River World. Dongzun's hometown was Fu World, the famous frontline plane. However, after obtaining the blooming flower remnant soul, he was sent to another world by Ji Yunan. It was Black River World. "Why are you going to Black River World?" Qi Ji asked, puzzled. "The mission is about to begin. Aren't you going to the Pantheon world early to prepare?" Dongzun shook his head. "My recent experiences seem to have been a little too smooth. I'm going to ask Elder Tang." Qi Ji was slightly shocked. After all, she knew very well that Dongzun's recent experiences had been deliberately arranged by someone, and even she was involved. "Who's Elder Tang?" Qi Ji suppressed her emotions and changed the topic. She had known Dongzun for quite some time, but she didn't know much about his experiences before he broke the world. "A senior worthy of respect," Dongzun said seriously. "Black River World. What a rare guest." An old man in plain clothes smiled as he looked at Dongzun and Qi Ji. "Dongzun, what brings you here?" "Elder Tang." Dongzun bowed obediently, and then introduced the two of them. Qi Ji only bowed politely. She nodded and stood behind Dongzun. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have much of a relationship with Elder Tang, and he was just a normal person with a supernatural power. She didn't care much about him. If it wasn't for Dongzun, she wouldn't have even looked at the old man. As for respecting the old and loving the young, that didn't apply to world breakers. Perhaps Elder Tang was even younger than Qi Ji. Before Dongzun leveled up, Elder Tang had helped him a lot. He had built his own faction in Black River World. "Elder Tang, I'm here because I have something I hope you can help me with," Dongzun said. He summarized his questions. After hearing that, Elder Tang frowned. He asked Dongzun a few more details. After a moment of silence, he spoke. "Based on the experiences, it does seem like there is a big power involved," Elder Tang said quietly. But what?" Qi Ji spoke first. She was the one who was most concerned about Elder Tang's answer. Elder Tang looked at Qi Ji for a moment. He shook his head and said, "The God Society is backed by someone from 16 High School. No one can control them." 16. Dongzun repeated with confusion. He didn't know much about the big factions of the 10,000 worlds. For example, he knew Ziluo was very powerful. The God Society was powerful, but he didn't know how powerful they were. 16. Qi Ji was different from Dongzun. She didn't know the background of the God Society, but she had at least heard of the name 16. Dongzun was still confused, but Qi Ji reacted. She said, "If it is someone from 16 High School, then there is no need to worry about the God Society manipulating them." "That is impossible." Elder Tang agreed. "Not bad. Dongzun, at least you don't have to worry about someone plotting against you when you join the God Society. On the other hand, if you are targeted by a big power, the God Society can be your shield." With Elder Tang and Qi Ji's confirmation, Dongzun felt a lot more at ease. He felt like he was being a bit paranoid. He was just a normal person who had a lucky encounter. Why would so many big powers be looking for him? Chapter 5:16. Read. Since that's the case, I'll take my leave. Dongzun was in a good mood after receiving a satisfactory answer, so he immediately took his leave. He was in a hurry to return to Ziluo and prepare to head to the Pantheon world to complete the Gods Union's mission. Dongzun had already made up his mind to obtain a certain status in the Gods Union. If he were to encounter a mighty figure in the future, he would be considered someone with a backer. However, after hearing the name of 16, he inexplicably thought of the silver-robed masked man he had met years ago. He was originally from the Palace world, but he had been forcefully sent to the Black River world. The silver-masked man had even left a black sword in his body. If there's a mighty figure spying on me, it probably has something to do with him. I wonder how he compares to 16. Dongzun thought to himself. It was a pity that he did not know what he looked like back then. Otherwise, it would not have been difficult to trace his identity. After Dongzun and Qiji left, Elder Tang slowly relaxed. However, another person slowly appeared before him. If Qiji were here, she would definitely recognize this person as the green-robed man who had given her resources and the mission. Well done. The green-robed man smiled and nodded. Clearly, he had heard the entire conversation between Elder Tang and Dongzun. Elder Tang's face was expressionless. He only smiled and said, I wonder, which subordinate of 16 high school does Sir belong to? The green-robed man's hand paused slightly. He raised his head and looked at Elder Tang. You know this too? You don't seem like someone from this plane. There was no reason for someone from this plane to be so familiar with Dao integration forces. Elder Tang shook his head lightly as if this was nothing. Of course, ordinary people can't control the one behind the Gods Union. However, if he's also from 16 high school, it shouldn't be a problem for him to do some things. The green-robed man's expression became slightly more solemn. He said in a low voice, It's best not to investigate things that you shouldn't know about. Of course. Elder Tang smiled. I have no intention of going against a certain Sir. Dongzun is just a friend I met long ago. He disassociated himself from Dongzun, implying that if a certain Sir was interested in Dongzun, he would not interfere. The green-robed man looked at him deeply. His figure quickly disappeared and reappeared in front of the others. Go and investigate this Tang guy. The azure-robed man said to his subordinates, especially what he did before coming to the Black River era. Not a single thing can be omitted. Yes. The subordinates hurriedly responded and left. However, one person walked over from behind. This person might be a variable. Should we inform the Lord? Forget it, there's no need to trouble you with such a small matter. The green-robed man thought for a while and finally shook his head. He recalled Mu Qishuang's expression when she told him about this matter, it shouldn't be too important. Just as Dongzun had joined the Gods Guild and was about to embark on his journey to the Pantheon world, the war between the two realms seemed to have paused for a moment. The number of main gods had decreased, but the gods under them were still constantly invading the various worlds, with the goal of destroying the astral realms that had main gods. This was because the two sides were far more determined than before. They began with a battle between sovereigns. As a result, after a long period of fighting, the highest level of combat power on both sides was somewhat fatigued. In fact, many important figures had already been injured, so the frequency at which they attacked had naturally decreased. In fact, in terms of peak combat power, the Pantheon world should be inferior. After all, they only had 12 main gods, while the various worlds had 16. However, in comparison, the fusing gods were indeed not as united. Yu Lian also did not have the prestige of Austin, Daisy, and the others, who could directly order everyone to participate in the war. For example, the God Emperor Zhao Renwang, Zhu Po, Sai Yun, and the others had not taken action until now. Instead, Lu Wen was quite active. This could not be helped. As the main culprit behind Fan Lun's death, he was given special attention by the gods. There were even people who directly went to his chronology to cause trouble. On the other hand, because of the evil god Ji Yunan's ferocious reputation, the ordinary gods were all warned by the main gods. As a result, Not many people dared to disturb Ji Yunan's god kingdom. As the main gods and the fusing gods gradually calmed down, this meant that both sides had entered a phase of war of attrition. They were fighting with human lives on the line to see who could last the longest. Of course, a large part of the reason why the main gods did not dare to show themselves was because of Ji Yunan. The fact that the main gods had entered a phase of attrition in advance was because of Ji Yunan. In the blue sky, Mu Qishuang looked at Ji Yunan, who was sitting comfortably on a chair, and asked with her head tilted, "What do you plan to do?" During this period of time, Ji Yunan had remained in the blue sky, personally controlling Dongzun's actions. Mu Qishuang was just a cover. She could not perfectly realize Ji Yunan's intentions, so he had to personally control this matter. Dongzun will kill someone he shouldn't have. There was nothing for Ji Yunan to hide, so he said casually, "When Lorenza finds out, she'll definitely send people to capture Dongzun." As the executor of Ji Yunan's plan, the information about Dongzun's mission could not be hidden from Mu Qishuang. Therefore, she knew very well that Ji Yunan's true target was Lorenza. So what? Mu Qishuang thought about it carefully, but did not understand what kind of trap there was. The other person is just a character. Lorenza can just send people to kill Dongzun. She won't. Ji Yunan said with certainty, "Lorenza will definitely capture Dongzun and kill him herself. When she does so, she'll get a surprise." Mu Qishuang's eyes narrowed. "The person you want Dongzun to kill, who is it?" "Lorenza's former teacher. The poisonous fruit that was Dongzun was close to ripening. He just had to wait for Lorenza to find out and eat him." However, at this moment, Ji Yunan suddenly left the blue sky. An unexpected situation had forced him to rush to the crack world. This place, which Lu Wen called the original realm, was something Ji Yunan wanted to investigate after he killed Lorenza, but now he had to return early. The wisp of will he left here told him that there was news from Fu Cheng that the first third transition player had appeared. Ji Yunan's will invaded the crack world and immediately read all the information about this player, as well as his entire gaming history. This was a homebody called Li Han, who was passionate about all kinds of role-playing games. After trying a dozen different methods, he finally succeeded in leveling up his in-game character to the level of the third transition 16th, becoming the true king of Pantheon. His progress far surpassed other players. Chapter 517. Read. Fu Cheng had made the game Radiant Origins very successful. In the Blue Star Federation, Radiant Origins had become a trend. Almost all console players would get their hands on one, and there were more and more high-level players. However, the appearance of a third transition player so soon was somewhat out of Ji Yunan's expectations. Ji Yunan projected his will onto the Blue Star once again. He found a random person to possess and went to Fu Cheng's home. According to his previous instructions, Fu Cheng had already left all the information here. Perhaps because Ji Yunan usually communicated with Fu Cheng in the form of a notebook, the latter chose to print all the information on paper and hand it over to Ji Yunan. In this era of advanced technology, it was actually rare to still use paper to record information. Fortunately, there was not much information on Li Han. Even if all the information was printed out, it would only be a document as thick as a finger. Fu Cheng's home was a two-story villa. Ji Yunan quietly entered and then walked into Fu Cheng's study. He swaggered inside and slowly read through Li Han's information. The information obtained through writing was limited. It was only then that Ji Yunan was able to see the full picture of Li Han's information. This was a seemingly ordinary otaku player, to be the first to complete the third transition and leave the second place far behind. No one would believe that he was not a diehard otaku. Of course, just being an otaku was not enough. To achieve this, apart from investing a lot of time, one also needed extremely high gaming talent. For example, Ji Yunan was an expert gamer. This was not the reason, but the result. It was because Ji Yunan was a gaming genius and had gone through a lot of training to get to where he was today. It was the same for Li Han. In the photo, Li Han was a slightly delicate-looking boy. He was 26 years old this year, and there was nothing unusual about his life. He grew up in an ordinary middle-class family. Although he was not very rich, he did not have to worry about food and clothing. He loved gaming from a young age and became a freelancer when he became an adult. In this era, being a freelancer was no longer a derogatory term. Instead, it had become a synonym for those with special skills. Many people envied them for not having to work from 9 to 5. They could allocate their time freely, and their income was quite considerable. Lee Han made a living in the gaming industry. His daily income was mainly made up of game guides, game videos, copyright fees, and a portion of consulting fees. Ji Nan was actually quite familiar with this kind of daily life because he was in a similar situation back then. As for Lee Han's gaming journey, it was not much different from what Ji Nan had expected. He basically followed the train of thought given by the officials and walked step by step to the third promotion. Although there were some tricks involved, they were still within the scope of permission. Just like Ji Nan himself, he had tried leveling up twice in a row. These were all unique strategies. All in all, he was a normal player in real life and in the game. The only abnormal thing was that he didn't disappear. Yes, after Lee Han completed his third promotion and theoretically completed the entire Radiant Origins game, he was still living a normal life on the blue planet. To him, Radiant Origins was like an ordinary, excellent game. He had poured 5 years of his youth into it, but that was all. There was no such thing as time travel or leaving the world through the cracks. What does this mean? Is it that the conditions have not been met, or that another Lee Han has already appeared outside? Ji Nan's imagination ran wild as he tried to guess the possibilities. It was reasonable to say that the conditions were not exactly the same. After all, this was just a copy of Ji Nan's game. Whether it was the game itself or the timeline, there were no variables that were controlled. However, if it was the latter possibility, it seemed a little funny. Ji Nan seemed to see himself hundreds of years ago on the blue planet. After completing his third promotion, he continued his mediocre life and slowly walked toward death. But now, after just a few hundred years, there was no trace of him left. These thoughts only stayed in Ji Nan's mind for a moment before he immediately expelled them. No matter what the truth was, he was already a 12th-stage Dao integration cultivator. No one in this world could easily erase his existence. Whether the people being thrown out of the world through the cracks was a natural phenomenon or someone was really manipulating it, it did not prevent Ji Nan from finding out the truth and then killing the threat to him. On the contrary, Ji Nan became even more determined. When he returned this time, he would instruct people to pay attention to a person named Lee Han and the new Holy Light Attribute Cultivator. Maybe Ju Po is right. Ji Nan touched his chin and muttered to himself, only by controlling both worlds can it be the most convenient way to explore the secrets here. On the other hand, since he had come to the world through the cracks this time, should he visit Lu Wen's hometown? Ji Nan was also interested in the cultivation civilization that existed on the blue planet. According to Lu Wen, there were Dao integration cultivators here. Perhaps they had a different understanding of this world. Just as Ji Nan was thinking about this, the sound of footsteps came from outside, and then the sound of the door being opened. "Mom, who are you?" A girl with light grey hair exclaimed, pointing at Ji Nan. This was Fu Cheng's daughter, Chen Jingjing. Her surname was like her father's, and even her hair color was the same. Fu Cheng's ex-husband was a quarter white. Chen Jingjing had just returned home and was looking everywhere to see if Fu Cheng was at home. She did not expect to meet such a stranger. 5 years had passed, and Chen Jingjing was now an 18-year-old girl. At least she did not lose her cool and did not shout all the time. She just looked at Ji Nan warily. The latter did not look like her mother's friend, but more like a burglar. "There are surveillance cameras everywhere near my house. No matter how you came in, you must have been seen." Chen Jingjing took a deep breath to keep her voice from trembling. "If you go out now, I can pretend that I didn't see anything." Ji Nan's indifferent gaze swept over her, and he had no intention of saying anything to her. He just slowly walked towards the window. Under Chen Jingjing's astonished gaze, Ji Nan manipulated this body to open the window, and then jumped out. Bang! A soft sound rang in Chen Jingjing's ears. She hurriedly ran to the window, only to see that the stranger had already landed firmly on the ground and was walking forward unhurriedly. Chen Jingjing swallowed her saliva and looked down. Her house was a high-rise villa. Even though there were only 2 floors, the height was close to 7 or 8 meters. Was he an expert who cultivated force? Chapter 518. Read. One after Ji Yunan left Fu Cheng's house, he found a random river and jumped in before withdrawing his consciousness. Even though it had been 5 years since 2 people died mysteriously, because they were both related to Fu Cheng, some people would still connect the dots. For now, Ji Yunan did not want the Blue Planet civilization to understand him, and he did not want them to know about high-level cultivators. After his consciousness left Blue Planet, Ji Yunan tried to find Lu Wen's hometown, but the original realm was vast enough. The nature of the starry sky plane determined that it was much larger than the major astral realms. Even with Ji Yunan's current realm, it was difficult to quickly scan the entire plane. And Lu Wen could not possibly give the coordinates of the civilization, so it would take some time to find it. Ji Yunan left a part of his consciousness to search here, and at the same time, sent a clone to Blue Sky to keep an eye on Dongzun's progress. Dongzun had already arrived at the Pantheon world. Along with him was Qi Ji, who treated him like a cash cow. However, the 2 of them had a thrilling journey, and it was not peaceful at all. After all, the 2 worlds were still at war. Going in and out of the 2 worlds was considered illegal immigration. Once caught, it would not end well. Only the Celestial Society was bold and skilled, and they relied on the fact that there were people in the Pantheon world to receive them. Of course, even in the Celestial Society, both sides were looking out for each other. If Dongzun did not have the special care of Blue Sky, he would not have been given such a mission. We're finally here. Qi Ji let out a long sigh, grumbling. They had suffered a lot along the way. If not for the fact that she wanted to follow Dongzun and see if there were any new missions to accept, she would not have been willing to suffer. Dongzun comforted her, and Qi Ji was also a world breaker. She would not let her actions affect her emotions, and the 2 of them quickly began the mission. When they arrived at the Pantheon world, the Celestial Society members had already passed the mission information to Dongzun. This time, he needed to kill an old man called Claude. He was once a top legendary powerhouse, but now that he was getting older, his strength had regressed. An ordinary-looking old man had offended the Heavenly God Society in some way, and they had sent him to kill him. However, it was not as if Dongzun had never joined an organization before. He knew the principles of these organizations. They were to complete the mission properly and not ask too many questions. Old Claude was at a Trenza, the place that Ji Yunan was most familiar with. This was the most important continent in the game, where many important NPCs gathered. At the same time, it was also the intersection of major quest clues, and Claude was one of them. The relationship between Claude and Lorenza was extremely complicated. He was Lorenza's teacher, and at the same time, Lorenza had once admired him. He had almost become the goddess's lover. But in the end, after Claude noticed this phenomenon, he resolutely left his proud disciple and completely cut off this relationship. Claude knew very well that Lorenza's path could not be filled with love. Otherwise, she would die on the path to igniting the godfire. It was never easy for mortals to become gods. When Lorenza finally became the goddess of flowers and came back to look for Claude, her teacher was already very old. Of course, the lifespan of mortals couldn't compare to that of gods. Claude was able to live until now because of Lorenza's divine power. She turned Claude into her oracle, so that he could live forever while bathed in divine power. The price was that Claude could no longer advance, and the 2 of them were completely different. Is the target an oracle? Dongzun carefully read the mission information. It mentioned Claude's identity, but of course, it didn't include his past with Lorenza. Even the name of flowers was deliberately hidden, so Dongzun didn't notice anything unusual. However, the remnant soul of flowers found the name Claude strangely familiar. I feel like I've seen him somewhere. Unfortunately, she was only a part of Lorenza's soul and inherited too few memories. Obviously, she wouldn't have such a deep memory as Claude. Qi Ji said, the target's strength is similar to ours, maybe a little weaker. He lives a very regular life. It seems that the main goal this time is to prevent him from escaping. Claude lived in a small, remote town as an old knight. No one knew how old he was or where he came from. He repeated the same life every day and didn't practice martial arts. Most of his strength was wasted. With Dongzun and Lorenza's strength, it wasn't difficult to defeat Claude. Instead, they had to think about how to kill him and how to escape from the gods after killing him. Claude was already very old. His hair was white, and he habitually carried an old man's cane when he went out. Only his spirit was not bad, and his eyes were bright. The god's gift made him immortal, but it didn't give him the motivation to live. He could only live like this day after day, watching his friends and family grow old one by one. Sometimes, he wondered if it would be better if he just died like that. But Claude knew that it was impossible, because every time he was in mortal danger, the divine power from the goddess of flowers would protect him. As an oracle cared for by the main god, he naturally received such preferential treatment. Claude walked on the road as usual. He didn't like riding in a carriage, and preferred to move forward on his own feet. The next moment, a dim light suddenly appeared in front of Claude. It was a sharp sword that pierced through his heart, trying to end his life. Dongzun had been preparing for this sword for a long time. With his current realm and years of experience in life and death situations, Claude was no longer able to fight against him. Old Claude watched the tip of the sword pierce through his heart, but there was no expression on his face. Would he still be saved by the divine power? Or would the divine power heal the wound? Claude, who was used to this, was still waiting quietly. However, to his surprise, the moment his divine power soared up, it instantly retracted because it came into contact with Dongzun's nomological laws. Claude looked at this scene in shock. His heart was completely destroyed, and his body fell heavily to the ground. Is it that simple? Dongzun looked at the ground doubtfully, confirming that the target was indeed dead. Qiji also appeared beside him. She didn't attack immediately to prevent Claude from escaping, but she didn't expect that she wouldn't be needed at all. Dongzun was a little puzzled. This mission was too smooth, and the target clearly had an extremely noble aura. Why did it suddenly disappear? It wasn't until a voice sounded in his head that Dongzun realized something was wrong. We may be in big trouble. The voice of the remnant soul of flowers was a little shaky. This old man is the oracle of my main body, and his divine power also disappeared because of me. Chapter 519. Read. 1. I've been discovered. A trace of panic flashed through Dongzun's heart. However, he was not a rookie, so he quickly calmed down. Will you be taken back by the main body? If there's still a chance, let's leave this place immediately. Having been with the Blossom Remnant Soul for many years, Dongzun certainly knew that she had developed self-consciousness and was definitely not as simple as a clone of the main body. She definitely did not want to see the main body like this. However, at this point, some things were out of their control. It's too late. The Blossom Remnant Soul's voice sounded again. This time, it was no longer trembling, only deep despair. Dongzun's heart turned cold, and he subconsciously wanted to leave this place, but he obviously did not know what it meant for the gods to have a messenger specially taken care of. In the blink of an eye, 2 divine lights had already landed in front of them. 2 tall messengers stared at Dongzun coldly. It's him. One of them seemed to have confirmed Dongzun's identity, while the other nodded and reached out to grab Dongzun without the slightest hesitation. Dongzun did not put down the long sword in his hand. He simply stabbed it at the man while retreating rapidly. Unfortunately, his resistance seemed to be useless. The other party just waved his hand lightly and broke the long sword. Instead, he grabbed Dongzun's shoulder with one hand, making him unable to move. Just this casual grab made Dongzun feel that the laws all over his body were suppressed, and he could not move at all. He could only watch helplessly as the opponent attacked. It was the first time Dongzun had faced such an enemy, but he already realized what it meant. Star Lord. The strength of a Lord God's messengers was that they could even break through the limit of rank 4 after borrowing the divine power of a Lord God. Even the most ordinary rank 5 was not something a legendary powerhouse could fight against. Dongzun had no ability to resist at all. The Blossom Remnant Soul in his mind immediately fell asleep and sank into the depths of Dongzun's consciousness, trying in vain to escape Lorenza's search. Although she knew that it was almost impossible to succeed, there was nothing else she could do. After the two of them grabbed Dongzun, they immediately took him away. They did not even look at Qi Ji from beginning to end, as if the latter was just an insignificant character. After Dongzun was taken away, Qi Ji turned around and looked around, but she did not see anyone from the Celestial Society. She finally realized something. "Did you kill Claude?" Lorenza's calm and indifferent gaze fell on Dongzun's face like moonlight, making him feel like he had nowhere to hide. Yes. Dongzun felt that his entire body was out of his control as he subconsciously answered. Lorenza sighed softly. Tens of thousands of years had passed, and her impression of Claude had become a little blurry. There wasn't much of their friendship left, otherwise, the latter wouldn't have been killed so easily. If Lorenza had paid attention instead of simply protecting Claude with her divine power, she would have been able to save him. But now that things had come to this, Lorenza wouldn't regret it. Perhaps ending this immortal life was a good thing for Claude. "Why did you kill him?" Lorenza's voice was still calm, but the power that could penetrate people's hearts had not weakened. Dongzun was just a breakworld person. He could not hide anything from the leader god. He honestly said, "I am a member of the Sky God group. This is an organization mission." The Celestial Deity Society? Lorenza raised an eyebrow. She hadn't expected this answer. Because of what had happened to Ji Yunan, she was no longer a member of the Celestial Deity Society. Her first thought was that the old man Zi Luo was seeking revenge for what had happened. But then she dismissed that possibility. The old man had no reason to know who Claude was, and it was pointless for him to seek revenge on her. Lorenza's gaze landed on Dongzun's face. It was as if she wanted to stab deep into his brain and see what was deep in his soul. The resistance of that wisp of remnant flower soul was obviously of no use at all. In front of Lorenza, there was no room for her to hide. "It's my soul." Lorenza recognized what the remnant soul was the moment she saw it. It's from that time, she remembered how, in order to become a leader god, she had split her soul and sent it to the heavenly world. She did not expect a part of it to be left outside. But now, this soul had appeared in such an unexpected way. Is it purely an accident, or is someone doing this on purpose? The leader's subconscious caution made Lorenza wonder if there was something hidden behind this. "Go and investigate," Lorenza's voice sounded among the god emissaries. "It's my turn." Ji Yunan's voice sounded as he slowly got up from blue sky. Mu Qishuang already knew his entire plan and knew that he wanted to use this to kill Lorenza, but she was not very optimistic about Ji Yunan's plan. The reason was simple. She did not think that with a leader's cautiousness, he would easily step into Ji Yunan's trap. Even if Ji Yunan asked Blue Sky to appear as a cover so that Lorenza's investigation would not take effect, but the whole thing still lacked a source of motivation. To put it simply, Lorenza had no need for remnant souls. She could absorb them to step into the trap, but she could also be cautious and not absorb them. She only needed to keep the remnant souls in her hands and not be controlled by others. "You don't know Lorenza well," Ji Yunan said. "She will definitely not accept something that comes to her doorstep. But sometimes, being cautious may not be enough to prevent the poisonous fruit from entering her mouth." Ji Yunan looked at Mu Qishuang and said, "If she finds out that I'm the one behind this, she will send Dongzun far away and find a place to completely destroy him." "What if it's me?" Mu Qishuang cooperated and played the supporting role. "She will want to see what you're trying to do." Blue Sky. Lorenza did not have to spend much effort to find the person who was controlling Dongzun. After so many years, the celestial gods had become a rather complicated organization. Mu Qishuang could control Dongzun from inside, so Lorenza could naturally find traces. Just as Ji Yunan expected, she quickly brought Dongzun back after a moment of silence. Lorenza tapped lightly with her finger, and Dongzun felt a chill between his brows as if something was being pulled out. His heart was cold. He knew that in the end, he would not be able to protect the Blossom Remnant Soul. Although Lorenza had taken out the Remnant Soul, she had no intention of absorbing it. Instead, she completely enveloped it with the power of laws, trying to destroy her own Remnant Soul. "What are you trying to do?" she said softly. Using the threat of destroying the Remnant Soul, she tried to force the person behind the scenes to make a stand. If he did not make a stand, Then she would only lose a wisp of her remnant soul. She had no intention of taking it in the first place. However, what Lorenza did not expect was that after the remnant soul left Dongzun's body, another force in his body began to awaken. Chapter 520. Read. 1. Lorenza was very cautious. She knew how many chances the hidden enemy would have if a strand of soul wandered outside. It was much more effective than hair or flesh. So, she had no intention of accepting the soul that was delivered to her. Instead, she was determined to destroy it and find out the intention of the mastermind. However, at this moment, she suddenly sensed an inexplicable energy fluctuation. Dongzun couldn't move, but he could feel the power in his body boiling. Then, he felt a pain in his chest. A pitch-black sword instantly pierced through his chest, targeting Lorenza. An evil god. At this moment, Lorenza not only recognized the enemy, but she also understood the details of the whole thing. Using the separated soul to attract her attention and bring the hidden power into the divine kingdom. That was the enemy's real goal. For Ji Yunan, the biggest problem in killing a chief god was actually how to get close to them and attack when they were unprepared. If they were already prepared, like Eugene, Daphne, and the others, it was actually far from easy to kill. With Ji Yunan's current power, if he was directly hit by the evil god's body, Austin would probably lose a layer of skin. The only problem was that he couldn't hit. Earlier, when he ambushed Daphne, the highly vigilant nature goddess had already dodged in advance before he actually attacked. She used the laws to slightly delay Ji Yunan's movements, and finally escaped. But even a chief god couldn't be in a state of vigilance all the time. When they were relaxed, it was the perfect time to assassinate them. That was what Lorenza was doing right now. Most of her attention was on the remnant soul. She wanted to see what Mu Qishuang's intentions were after all these things. It wasn't that she didn't check Dongzun, but with the remnant soul of the flowers before, she completely concealed Ji Yunan's power. She only showed her fangs now. The black dagger was as fast as lightning, and it reached Lorenza almost as soon as it appeared. Before Lorenza could block the dagger with the laws, she found that the dagger stopped on its own and exploded. The aura of shadow instantly filled the divine kingdom of flowers. A figure appeared from it and instantly punched Lorenza's head. The shadow dagger was not a killer move, but a springboard for Ji Yunan's descent. From the appearance of the dagger to the landing of Ji Yunan's punch, the whole process was done in one go. He did not give Lorenza any time to catch her breath. Lorenza's divine body shattered without any suspense, and Ji Yunan didn't stop at all. He turned around and began to destroy the flowery divine kingdom. Previously, when they had surrounded and attacked Fan Lun, this part of the work had been done by Ju Po and Lu Wen. However, in reality, Ji Yunan was equally proficient in this. He stabbed the shadow sword into the ground with one hand, and endless shadows quickly spread out, covering the entire divine kingdom in the blink of an eye. Ji Yunan was already at the 12th level of the law of shadows, so he was very familiar with these things and did not feel any pressure at all. One by one, the oracles were dragged into the shadows or killed by the pitch-black figures that appeared. They had no chance to resist at all. In just half a quarter of an hour, the entire divine kingdom had completely fallen into the enemy's hands. The efficiency was so high that it made people's hair stand on end. After her divine body was shattered by Ji Yunan, Lorenza, who had not shown herself all this time, finally reformed her body after losing the ability to control the laws of nature to resist. Evil God! You really are the source of all evil, Lorenza said in a low voice, but her body began to emit a blood-red glow. Her divine kingdom was invaded, and many of her people died. She had been forced into a desperate situation. However, Lorenza was a ruthless person who had dared to split her own soul even before she had become a Lord God. Now, she had no intention of sitting still and waiting for her death. Instead, she was going to fight for her last chance. Endless blood burst through the borders of the divine kingdom. On every continent in the world of gods, a blood-red light could be seen shooting into the sky, drawing a blood-red rainbow in the sky. All the lords moved in unison, rushing towards the flowery divine kingdom. During the battle, everyone's attention was on the front lines. They did not expect that someone would attack Lorenza in the rear. In the flowery divine kingdom, endless bloodlight pierced into Ji Yunan's body. At the same time, Ji Yunan's fist blew up Lorenza's head. Between life and death, Lorenza made the most resolute decision. She would use her own life as the price to force Ji Yunan to stay. As Lorenza's flesh and blood flew everywhere, Ji Yunan's sin value skyrocketed again. He had already surpassed the limit of rank 13, but it was too late for him to level up. The remaining 11 main gods had already arrived. Lorenza had already fallen, but the bloodlight she left behind was the last of the divine kingdom's power, trapping Ji Yunan like a cage. Even though Ji Yunan had broken it with a wave of his hand, the moment it stopped him, Ji Yunan could not escape immediately. Hence, the holy light arrived. As expected of Lorenza, Austin was still the first to appear. He swung his holy sword without hesitation, sealing off Ji Yunan's path of retreat. If Ji Yunan wanted to escape by force, he would definitely retreat. This was not the first time Austin had seen Ji Yunan forcefully open a dimensional passage while withstanding the holy sword's damage. However, the situation was different this time. Austin's expression changed slightly, and his hands did not stop moving as if he wanted to let Ji Yunan escape. At this moment, a darkness that seemed to devour everything came down from above Ji Yunan's head. There was no end to it, and there was nowhere to run. Dark Goddess Daisy. The scythe surrounded by death energy and the azure light that pierced through the sky attacked at the same time. Their target was Ji Yunan's back. God of Death Buyer and Master of Azure Boswell, Ji Yunan faced the combined attacks of 4 of the most powerful overgods in almost an instant, and there were still more overgods rushing over from behind. A moment ago, he had put Lorenza in a desperate situation. Now, it was his turn. Come on. Ji Yunan's eyes were cold. He withstood the holy sword's power with his back, and then punched the scythe and azure light, breaking them apart. The holy sword entered his body, and terrifying holy flames instantly ignited Ji Yunan's body. The all-devouring darkness began to envelop his head, causing Ji Yunan's consciousness to turn pitch black, and he completely lost consciousness. The Lady of Darkness was not much weaker than Austin, and in terms of the nature of her power, Ji Yunan would have a harder time dealing with her. However, Ji Yunan still did not care. Even though he had completely lost consciousness, he still followed the predetermined route. The route he had set was very special. It did not lead to either of the 2 major worlds, but to the world of cracks. The world of gods was the home of the gods, and to go to the world of heavens, he had to pass through the dimensional wall, which was likely to be stopped midway. The best place to go was undoubtedly the world of cracks. Charred. Amidst the boundless silence and darkness, Ji Yunan still kept his consciousness and mind clear. In that instant, Ji Yunan charged through the spatial passageway, and the combined might of the 4 overgods completely destroyed the space at the same time, leaving no traces behind. Chapter 521. Read. 1. Ji Yunan disappeared again. He was just like those famous assassins in history, shining brilliantly in an assassination, and then no one could find any trace of him after that. Of course, it was a bit embarrassing for him to be an assassin as a path-fusing cultivator. But on the other hand, if the assassination target was a main god, it seemed to become a great achievement. The fall of a main god was always in a large-scale war of the same level, with at least 3 or 4 people of the same level besieging them. They had never seen one die at the hands of a single person. For example, there were several wars of the gods in the early years, and the siege of Lu Wen, Ju Po, and Ji Yunan. But the Lord of Flowers, Lorenza, died at the hands of Ji Yunan, and only Ji Yunan made a move, and he succeeded in a very short time. The result of this battle caused a stir in both worlds. After all, it was related to the fall of a main god, and no one dared to take it lightly. On the other hand, the war between the 2 worlds had just begun, and the world of gods had already lost 2 main gods, which was a blow to the morale of the gods. Everyone understood that the war was essentially a war between main gods and path-fusing cultivators. No matter how many ordinary gods and star lords there were, they could not affect the upper echelons. But once the war broke out, whoever made the first move would be at a disadvantage. But what about the front line? 2 main gods had already died in the rear. What was the point of fighting? The dark cloud of defeat had begun to envelop the sky of the world of gods. Still haven't found him? Austin met with the Lady of Darkness, Daisy, and their expressions were solemn. Until now, they had not found Ji Nan. Daisy shook her head gently. We have been looking for him since he disappeared that day. The bit wall has not fluctuated, so he has not returned to the heavens. If he is not hiding in the gap between the two worlds, he must still be hiding in some corner. Although she said there were two possibilities, Daisy was obviously more inclined to the latter. After all, the gap between the two worlds was too narrow. They had searched it before, but naturally, they had found nothing. It had to be mentioned here that the location of the crack world was indeed very remote. It was so remote that if Ji Nan had not discovered Taoist Netherworld first, he might not have found the original realm even after a year and a half of searching. It wasn't that no one had explored the gap between the two realms, but since ancient times, only Taoist Netherworld had discovered the location of the original realm. This was not something that could be explained by luck. Austin agreed with Daisy's opinion as well. He had some understanding of Ji Nan's concealment skills. He believed that Ji Nan must be hiding in some corner of the Pantheon world, secretly licking his wounds, waiting for the moment when his wounds were completely healed before he would come out again to hunt down lords. He felt that day was not far away. However, Austin might be disappointed because when Ji Nan's will awakened, he had already arrived at the world of the gaps, which was also the original realm that Lu Wen mentioned. The first thing that came into Ji Nan's eyes was a boundless starry sky, somewhat similar to the Milky Way in his memory. Ji Nan did not study astronomy in his previous life, nor could he tell where he was from the star map. However, after his will awakened, he successfully connected with his body. Just as he had expected, the combined attack of 4 top lords had seriously injured even the body of the evil god. Lorenza is still Lorenza. Ji Nan could not help but shake his head. He did not expect Lorenza to be so resolute. She did not care about her last chance of survival and wanted to drag him down with her. After all, the god of flowers, who was at the level of a lord, was an extremely rare situation even in the game. And the darkness from the Lady of Darkness had left countless negative statuses on his body, which greatly slowed down his self-healing process. Only after the power of these rules was expelled could his body return to normal. Therefore, Ji Nan was not in a hurry and simply waited here patiently. Thus, he discovered that there was a huge civilization on the star path not far from the will. A coincidence? Ji Nan raised his eyebrows slightly, but he immediately understood. He did not know how long his will had been floating in the sea of stars. This kind of floating was not irregular. On the contrary, it would be attracted by a large number of living beings. In fact, it had come to him on its own. However, if he could find a civilization even while floating freely like this, it could only mean one thing: he had probably been in the original realm for a long time. What a pity. Ji Nan could not help but shake his head gently. If he had been asleep for more than 100 years, perhaps the battle outside would have already ended, and most of the arrangements on the blue planet would have been in vain. 4 powerhouses at the path integration level, time was really not something that could be used. Their existence in the world was too huge, and the interference of their will with the rules was definitely not a joke. It was useless to think about this now. After his will awakened, his body would recover in a month at most. Ji Nan began to look at the huge civilization below. This civilization was indeed very powerful, to the extent that Ji Nan had never seen it before. According to the calculations of his previous life, this civilization spanned at least 3 galaxies, modified and controlled more than 60 administrative planets, and a large number of uninhabitable resource planets, all of which were constantly supplying resources to the civilization. There was definitely no such civilization in the heavens. There were not many starry planes to begin with, and it was even more impossible to have one of this size. Even in the Milky Way sky, a large number of people gathered in the center of the plane, and there would not be more than 20 administrative planets. More importantly, Ji Nan felt a familiar aura inside the civilization. This familiarity did not come from acquaintances, but from the level. There were path integration cultivators of the same level here. Without much hesitation, Ji Nan descended to the ground. Anyway, he was just a wisp of will. At most, he could use a part of the rules, so he was not afraid of being besieged. Just as Ji Yunan entered the civilized star region, 3 wills immediately rose from the center of the star region and quickly approached him. After a short while, 3 figures appeared in front of Ji Yunan. These 3 people were dressed somewhat similarly, all wearing long robes of Taoist robes. The old man in the middle wore a Taoist crown, and a strange dragonfish pattern was embroidered on his chest. He had a calm expression, and on either side of him was a man and a woman. The man's hair was disheveled, and there was a look of indifference on his face, as if he had no interest in Ji Yunan. The woman's Taoist robes were neat, and her hair was neatly tied behind her head. There was a sharp look in her eyes. 3-path integration cultivators. I'm old Taoist Xian He. Greetings, fellow cultivator. The old man performed a strange greeting. He did not speak, but directly transmitted his will to Ji Yunan. They had all rushed here because they sensed the aura of a sage. However, seeing as the other party was waiting calmly, he did not have any ill intentions. Chapter 522. Reading. 1. After a short conversation, Ji Yunan understood the identities of the 3 people in front of him. They also confirmed that Ji Yunan had no ill intentions. The old Taoist priest, Xian He, was not a traditional Taoist priest. His real name was Xian He. On the other hand, the fierce-looking woman was a Taoist priest and called herself Taoist Blue One. The undisciplined young man was called Shu Anting, and he was an itinerant cultivator. On the capital planet, in a quiet and secluded courtyard, the interstellar civilization, Ji Yunan stood by the window and looked at the scenery outside as he muttered softly. This civilization, which the 3 sages called the interstellar civilization, had indeed reached an unimaginable level. The core of the interstellar civilization was a cultivation civilization. However, when a civilization developed to a certain level, a part of the technology tree would naturally be illuminated. However, like the heavenly worlds, most of it was metaphysical technology. Therefore, what entered Ji Yunan's eyes now was the strange scene of a group of people in long Taoist robes driving a hovering flying car. Daoist Ji Yunan, have you been here before? Xian He asked as he walked out from behind Ji Yunan with a faint smile. The 3 of them naturally did not believe Ji Yunan's claim that he was an interstellar wanderer. Given their realm, they could naturally see Ji Yunan's current state. This person was clearly just a will that had descended. Even his body had been condensed temporarily, so he definitely had his own foundation. However, there was actually a second civilization in the universe that possessed sage-level power. This was what Xian He and the others were interested in. This is my first time here. Ji Yunan replied calmly, do sages like you usually leave the star field to explore? It was not difficult for Dao integration experts to directly project their will outside, and they would not be affected by the harsh environment of the starry sky. Of course we do. Xian He nodded and said, however, the vastness of the universe is unimaginable. It is too inefficient for us to search for extraterrestrial civilizations. Such matters are usually done by fleets. Xian He had expected Ji Yunan to ask this question since he had come from an extraterrestrial planet. As he conversed with Xian He, Ji Yunan slowly learned about the current state of the interstellar civilizations. Due to the highly stable space laws of the original realm, even path integration practitioners could only teleport short distances within the original realm. Breaking the boundaries was impossible. Any barrier was stronger on the inside than on the outside. Ji Yunan could barely squeeze in a bit of his will from the outside, and the people inside could only be trapped here. Is the original realm a cage? This thought flashed through Ji Yunan's mind, but it quickly disappeared. There had never been a cage that would reflect information from the outside world and continuously transmit information to the outside world. After a short exchange, Ji Yunan continued, do you guys know a person called Lu Wen? He should have been on the verge of becoming a sage. Xian He shook his head. I've watched the stars get to where they are today. I've never heard of this person. Ji Yunan thought for a moment and said, the names might be different. He's a person who has mastered the dual laws of space and time. You've seen my master? Before Xian He could speak, Daoist Blue One's voice suddenly rang out, and he quickly appeared in front of Ji Yunan. Only then did Ji Yunan take a closer look at her. He realized that the style of her Taoist robe was indeed similar to Lu Wen's. Even though he was the one who spoke to Ji Yunan, Daoist Blue One and Shu Anting clearly did not relax their surveillance of this place. Ji Yunan's gaze slowly fell on Daoist Blue One. He was not surprised. There would not be many super civilizations that had path integration practitioners. It was very likely that there was only one. The possibility that this place was related to Lu Wen was very high. Lu Wen was a figure from tens of thousands of years ago in the interstellar civilizations. His real name was no longer known, and only his Taoist name, Heavenly Spring, was left behind. In his previous life, Lu Wen did not have many friends, nor did he have an illustrious master. He was more like a lone cultivator, and he did not even have many personal disciples. Now, 10,000 years later, there was only Daoist Blue One. "You've really seen my master before?" Daoist Blue One stared closely at Ji Yunan. "I've met him once." Ji Yunan had an unfathomable look on his face. "You know, in the endless Milky Way, one can always meet all kinds of people." Daoist Blue One's expression was solemn as he said, "But, he's already dead. He died during the tribulation to become a saint. Perhaps he was lucky enough to survive." "Impossible. Then why didn't he come back to take a look?" Daoist Blue One's emotions instantly became agitated. Ji Yunan shook his head lightly, and did not continue on this topic. He turned to look at Xian He and the old Daoist. "Then do you know a person called Daoist Huang Quan? Perhaps Lu Wen's survival had something to do with him." Daoist Blue One shook his head to indicate that he did not know. However, Xian He said, when Heavenly Spring was undergoing his tribulation, there were some strange words. "Oh, what did he say?" "To become a saint is to trap oneself. The heavenly worlds." The time that Ji Yunan had slept was actually not as long as he had imagined. It had only been a few years. During the time that Ji Yunan had disappeared, the two realms had already engaged in a true battle. Many gods and astral lords had died on the battlefield, and even one fusing Daos had fallen. The one who had died was Qin Guanruo of the netherworld skies. This rather ambitious fusing Daos, who was not considered old, had finally caught the attention of the lords because he had frequently taken action in the great battle. In the end, Austin and Bayer had joined forces to first kill his main body on the battlefield. Then, with the help of the Nightmare Lord, they had once again sneaked into the netherworld skies. The fusing Daos of the heavenly worlds were actually even more inexperienced when faced with enemy attacks. The lords had a great battle every 10,000 years or so, and it was not as if they had never fallen before. But what about the heavenly worlds? In the early years, there was a saying that the astral lords had fallen in a great battle, and their descendants had inherited the astral realm. However, such a thing had not happened in the past 10,000 years. Even battles between fusing Daos were rare. Therefore, if Qin Guanruo had been caught off guard and Austin and Bayer had chased him all the way to the netherworld skies, he would have fallen in the blink of an eye. There would not have been any time to rescue him. Finally, one of the fusing Daos of the heavenly worlds had fallen. This greatly boosted the morale of the heavenly worlds, and the flames of war were ignited once again. The heavenly worlds, which had not been united to begin with, began to retreat under the attacks of the gods. Very soon, they had entered a situation where each side fought for itself. In the midst of the great battle, only Ji Yunan's god nation was like a piece of pure land. No matter what happened outside, no one dared to come and throw away their lives. However, as the flames of war spread into the heavenly worlds, very few people obeyed the prohibitions of the lords, and gods constantly entered the god nation to attack. Fortunately, with Yang Xiaoxiao's current abilities, she was already able to temporarily mobilize the power of the god nation, so that it would not be destroyed. Until one day, Ji Yunan's figure suddenly appeared in the evil god's temple, and a deep and mysterious aura began to emerge throughout the entire god nation. Ji Yunan slowly opened his eyes and saw that the god nation was in a complete mess. Chapter 523. Read. One Patris was a newly ascended god, and his divine occupation was cold. This was a very common divine occupation. There were at least a dozen elemental gods in the world of gods, and there were quite a few fire gods as well. However, there had never been a main god, and the divine occupation was one of the 4 great fundamental origins, so everyone had a chance. Patris was an ambitious god. He was quite active in the war, but he was also very careful to protect himself. He had survived until now with a mere level 6 power. The secret to his ability to do this was to try his best not to fight against truly strong enemies. He focused his energy on causing destruction and never stayed on the main battlefield for too long. After a few rounds of such operations, he realized that it suited him very well. Cold was essentially a derivative of the divine occupation of water. Patris had the ability to hide himself in water, and which astral plane did not have water? Water became the best hiding place for Patris, and the heavenly worlds were not self-created astral planes, so there were too many flaws in the eyes of the gods. Patris almost effortlessly assassinated the powerhouses of these astral planes one by one, rapidly weakening the power of these astral lords so that they could be defeated one by one. As the operations became more successful, Patris's ambition grew. He was already quite famous among the gods, but he was not satisfied with just that. He wanted to be the most eye-catching person in this war. What could make one more famous than invading the astral plane of a path converger? Ji Yunan's disappearance was no secret. Most people were inclined to believe that he was trapped in the world of gods to heal, so his astral plane must be the most empty. However, Patris now regretted it. What is this? Patris looked ahead in disbelief. In his line of sight, there was a cloud of black fog rapidly covering the entire astral plane. This vigilant god did not hesitate. He immediately retreated from the astral plane, and only then did he look down with lingering fear. Just as he expected, as long as the black shadow swept through the area, all the invaders would be dragged into it, and there would be no more sounds to be heard. What frightened Patris even more was that the black fog's devouring targets were extremely precise. There was not a single mistake, and not a single one was missed. This meant that the black fog's control over this astral plane had reached an unimaginable level. It must be the evil god's return. No. Before Patris could finish his thoughts, a shadow had already appeared behind him and swallowed him whole. Ji Yunan slowly opened his eyes in the evil god's temple. After dealing with the little bugs that had snuck into his divine kingdom, his sin value had increased slightly, which meant that there were a few gods among them. Of course, it wasn't entirely Ji Yunan's own ability to be able to achieve absolute accuracy. It was more because he borrowed Yang Xiaoxiao's control over the god kingdom. Only the spirit of the divine kingdom could be as familiar with every corner of the divine kingdom as it was with its own body. Teacher, next time before you disappear, can you tell me first? Yang Xiaoxiao's helpless voice sounded. It was obvious that she had spent a lot of effort dealing with the attacks during this period of time. Ji Yunan smiled and said, "There won't be a next time." Yang Xiaoxiao was slightly stunned, but Ji Yunan had no intention of saying anything more. His gaze paused on the divine kingdom for a moment before he quickly retracted it. He had already recovered to his peak condition. The sin value from Van Lun and Lorenza had also allowed him to step into the ranks of the 13th level. Even if he had to face the attacks of the 4 main gods again, Ji Yunan was confident that he could escape unscathed. If it was a one-on-one battle, Ji Yunan wouldn't be able to suppress Austin by himself, but he wouldn't have anything to fear, because Austin wouldn't be able to kill him alone. From the second-class advancement until now, Ji Yunan had spent more than 10 years, and he could finally say that he was invincible. What he needed to do next was to kill all those who needed to be killed. As the other side of the divine kingdom, Yang Xiaoxiao seemed to sense what Ji Yunan was thinking. She said in a low voice, "Teacher, are we going to start a massacre? More or less?" Ji Yunan nodded and said, "Ju Po is right about one thing. Only by completely controlling this world will it be easier to investigate some things." Ji Yunan had completely stabilized his realm of the 13th level. His power had reached a whole new level, but he wasn't in a hurry to plunder the sin value. Instead, he went to another place. Ju Po Heaven. You mean, Lu Wen already knew that there was a world outside the original realm? Ju Po revealed a thoughtful expression after listening to Ji Yunan's narration. Ji Yunan didn't tell him the source of the information, nor would he reveal that he had entered and exited the crack worlds. He only told him what Lu Wen had said before his tribulation. I suspect that Huang Quan told him. Ji Yunan said calmly. Huang Quan likely discovered the original realm long ago, and even communicated with Lu when in his previous life. Ju Po nodded with a solemn expression. He understood Ji Yunan's meaning. Right now, only the four of them could confirm that they were from the original realm. If Lu Wen and Huang Quan had colluded long ago, then it was their turn to be careful. We have to speed up the plan. Ju Po understood the situation. Lu Wen had already regained the power he had in his previous life. They had to act as soon as possible. Right now, his and Ji Yunan's only advantage was that they were above the other two in terms of power. They had to make use of this time to completely pacify the two worlds. We have to make them engage in an all-out war, Ji Yunan said calmly. Although the Great War was going on, the only master gods and convergence practitioners who had truly died in the war was Qin Guan Ruo. Ju Po's gaze turned to Ji Yunan. Not everyone is willing to use their full strength. How do you plan to make them do it? Ji Yunan smiled. If they are not willing to use their full strength, then we'll go to their house to fight. This is a vicious plan. Ju Po couldn't help but be amused. Who are you going to find first? Dream Immortal? Sai Yun. Dream Immortal of the Cloud Dream Heaven and Sai Yun of the Milky Way Heaven were both convergence practitioners who had not put much effort into the Great War. They had only shown their faces once or twice. However, Ji Yunan didn't think much of these two small characters. He directly said, Zhao Renwang. The world of gods. A god nation stood high above the clouds. Holy light and a holy aura were everywhere inside, preventing anyone from having any thoughts of blasphemy. This was the god nation that belonged to the King of Gods, the god nation of the Lord of Light and Justice. It was the last pure land in the world. If one day, the world was engulfed by evil, then this place would fight to the last living creature, shed their last drop of blood, and swear to kill evil. And so, evil came today. Ji Yunan's figure suddenly appeared in the god nation of light. A heavy sword slashed into Austin's main god palace. A holy light boundary appeared instantly. Although it could not resist Ji Yunan's monstrous power, it purified all the shadows he used to form the sword. Not even a speck was left. Chapter 524. Reading. 1. You're very bold. Austin's voice sounded from behind Ji Yunan. He had already appeared and was looking at Ji Yunan coldly. Apart from the few who had surrendered, all the enemies who had dared to step into his divine kingdom had closed their eyes forever. Ji Yunan turned around and only smiled at him. His smile was clearly filled with one word: arrogance. Austin could tell that the evil god's realm had increased once again. It was so fast that he had to be vigilant. Evidently, this was the reason for his arrogance. But, did he think this was enough? The holy sword suddenly fell. In the Holy Light Kingdom, the power of this sword reached a terrifying level. Ji Yunan, who had long been able to resist the holy sword outside, was now at the 13th rank, but he was still turned into ashes by this sword. Only a shadow under his feet was still moving. Austin did not stop at all. Holy flames instantly swept over, and the shadow on the ground disappeared without a trace. However, Ji Yunan's aura did not dissipate. Loud laughter could be heard in the air. Ji Yunan's figure appeared once again and then disappeared quickly. He had long been prepared to escape. The previous one was just a clone. You can't escape. Austin's voice was still cold and calm, but there was a hint of certainty in it. He could easily leave a mark on those who dared to enter the Holy Light Kingdom, and the Holy Light would guide them. Tracking methods were never rare, especially in the hands of someone at Austin's level. Long before he appeared, he had already left a mark on Ji Yunan's body with the help of the omnipresent Holy Light in the Divine Kingdom. Although it was a hasty move, the mark could stay for at least a few days, which was enough for him to track Ji Yunan. Although he did not know why Ji Yunan had appeared in the Holy Light Kingdom, Austin had no reason not to seize the opportunity since it was right in front of him. His figure flickered, and he appeared at the Darkness God System's side. I left a mark on the evil god. Cover me when I enter the heavens, Austin said to the Lady of Darkness, Daisy. Daisy was slightly stunned, as if surprised by the evil god's reappearance. She nodded and said, all right. Moments after Austin and Daisy came to an agreement, The 4 peak-over gods appeared in the two-realm battlefield and charged toward the heavenly worlds. After hearing about the whereabouts of the evil god, Baya and Boswell didn't hesitate and immediately participated in this operation. All of the Tao integration stage cultivators were given a fright upon seeing this. The 4 strongest main gods had all appeared. This meant that they had completely given up on defense. Was this the final battle? Yu Lian and Ju Po appeared immediately, along with Zhao Renwang. The Star Lords of the 3 Primeval Star Realms represented the highest combat power in the heavenly planes. Zhao Renwang rarely fights, but now he had no choice but to show himself. Very soon, he was glad that he had made it in time. That was because Austin was rushing towards the Divine Emperor Heaven under the cover of the other 3. The 3 who were being held back by Daisy and the others were startled. Zhao Renwang immediately abandoned his opponent, Baya, and turned towards Divine Emperor Heaven. At this time, no one accused him of being selfish. A Star Lord could use at least 120% of his power in his own star realm. Instead, Yu Lian and Ju Po were doing their best to help him stall for time. Zhao Renwang moved extremely quickly. In the blink of an eye, he had already appeared in front of Austin. The ancient bronze sword that appeared in the sky landed heavily on Austin's head. The human sovereign sword that had been passed down since ancient times was up against the holy sword of the King of Gods. If this was any other time, perhaps Austin would have the intention to fight him. However, he was in a hurry to track down the evil god. How could he be in the mood? Austin blocked the human sovereign sword with his holy sword. Then, he pushed with his left hand. The golden scale appeared again and landed directly on Zhao Renwang's head. Austin, who had 2 peak guardhoods, rarely used impartial. However, it could often produce shocking results at critical moments. Zhao Renwang had fought Austin before, so he wasn't afraid of this light core god. Even though his own realm was only around the 13th rank, the human sovereign's special nomological laws allowed him to fight against Austin. However, he had never seen Austin use impartial before. When the scale landed, Zhao Renwang instinctively slashed with his sword. Then, he discovered that the human sovereign sword was actually suppressed by the golden scale. On the other side was Austin's holy sword. He had actually used his holy sword as the price to temporarily trap Zhao Renwang. The next moment, Ji Yunan's figure appeared first. He was right behind Austin and fiercely punched him. Of course, Ji Yunan wouldn't foolishly wait for the other party to find him. Instead, he took the initiative and pretended to be here to help. Austin knew that the evil god was here, so he was naturally prepared. A ball of holy flame exploded from his right hand. A terrifying shockwave crashed into Ji Yunan's body. Austin was a core god who had risen from the War of Gods. His battle awareness was extremely high. He immediately found a way to deal with Ji Yunan. Pure nomological laws would be directly blasted away by Ji Yunan's immense strength. Instead, he would first convert the nomological laws into physical power, which would at least provide some resistance. However, Ji Yunan's body of the evil god had been strengthened, and the power of his punch had reached an unimaginable level. The holy flame was instantly shattered, but he himself was sent flying by the shockwave. Austin followed him like a shadow. He immediately withdrew his holy sword and slashed it directly at Ji Yunan's body. At the same time, the golden scale also pressed down on Ji Yunan's head. Ji Yunan didn't have any intention of staying. He used the evil god's body to forcefully block Austin's sword. However, he also took the opportunity to escape the suppression of the golden scale. His figure instantly disappeared. Ji Yunan wasn't one of those Tao integration stage cultivators. He was all too clear about the power of the golden scale in Austin's hands. He had to escape from it. And with this delay, Yu Lian, Ju Po, and the other Tao integration stage cultivators all arrived. The scene was a little chaotic. Baya stood beside the Lady of Darkness, Daisy, and narrowed his eyes. "Let's stay here. Austin left a mark on that evil god, so he won't be able to escape." Daisy and King Dark Azure both nodded. With their strength, they weren't afraid of being surrounded by Tao integration stage cultivators. There was always a chance for them to escape. However, none of them expected that Austin would reappear in such a short time. His escaped. Austin only used 2 words to express what he meant. Where did he go? King Dark Azure, Boswell, couldn't help but ask. He knew that there was no way Ji Yunan could escape from Austin's surveillance. The front lines, Austin replied in an indifferent voice. The other 3 instantly turned around. Sure enough, Ji Yunan was already standing behind Beast God, who was hurriedly taking cover. At this moment, they suddenly understood what Ji Yunan was trying to do. He was clearly using himself as bait to start a war between main gods, and he had succeeded. Chapter 525. Read. 1. Ji Yunan appeared on the front lines. His first target was Beast God Bridges. Austin and the other 3 were in the heavenly realms and couldn't come to his rescue in time. Others had to help him. A faint purple mist enveloped him, and the Netherworld River flowed behind Ji Yunan. Above him, violent storms and thunder intertwined. In front of him was the image of a sinister-looking demon. The moment Ji Yunan appeared, the beast god retreated rapidly. Behind him, 4 chief gods attacked at the same time to stop Ji Yunan. Master of Nightmares Koche, Master of the Netherworld River Ogiast, Storm Chief God Raymond, and Demon King Stanley. They were the remaining 4 chief gods of the Darkness God system. Faced with the sudden arrival of Ji Yunan, these 4 chief gods attacked at the same time. The Tao integration practitioners of the heavenly realms definitely weren't this united. For example, Austin had already wreaked havoc in the Divine Emperor Heaven. Excluding Yu Lian and the other 2, only 2 or 3 Tao integration practitioners had appeared. However, this wasn't important, because Ji Yunan, who was already at level 13, didn't care how many people stood against him. No matter how many nomological laws you gathered, it would all be a single punch. With a single punch, the storm shattered, the dream collapsed, the Netherworld River flowed backward, and the demons retreated. Only then did the beast god's divine body shatter with a look of disbelief. The battlefield instantly fell silent. Li Si, who was originally fighting the beast god, looked at Ji Yunan with a strange look in his eyes. Breaking the combined nomological laws attack of 4 chief gods with a single punch and then directly shattering the beast god's divine body. Li Si suddenly felt that perhaps the gods were right. This person's growth rate wasn't normal at all. If he was allowed to continue developing, perhaps no one would be able to stop him anymore. Death God Baya was the first to arrive. He had always had a good personal relationship with the beast god. A cold glint flashed across his eyes. Chief gods relied on godhood to gather nomological laws. Although they wouldn't die on the spot when their divine bodies were destroyed, they would suffer greater losses than Tao integration practitioners. They definitely couldn't ignore it. The death god's scythe suddenly descended, but Ji Yunan calmly raised his head. There was still the aura of level 4 laws left on his body. His head twisted unnaturally before he punched the cold scythe. The power of Baya's all-out attack couldn't be underestimated. This saber strike directly chopped off half of Ji Yunan's shoulder, revealing the sinister white bones within. But the wound was healing at a terrifying speed. Ji Yunan smashed the scythe with a punch and then shook his right hand. The injury caused by the scythe had already healed. He flashed a cold smile at Baya, and his figure suddenly disappeared. His target had already become the Grim Reaper. Austin and the other 2 had also arrived. If the evil god wasn't in the heavenly worlds, they wouldn't be so foolish as to fight on someone else's home ground. That would be equivalent to seeking their own deaths. Baya had already become Ji Yunan's target. Thus, the 3 Star Masters of the 3 original realms also found their own opponents. Zhao Renwang was slightly weaker, so he didn't let his anger get to his head. He stared at Boswell while Ju Po went to look for Austin to continue the unfinished battle from last time. Back when they were hunting Van Lun, Ju Po had fought with Austin for a short while. At that time, he had underestimated justice and almost allowed Austin to get rid of him. It was Ji Yunan who made up for the last step. This time, Ju Po obviously wouldn't make such a mistake again. Yu Lian's opponent was the Lady of Darkness, Daisy. This was also the only battle between the old and the new. Daisy was actually much older than Austin. She had even met Yu Lian's teacher before, but Yu Lian had only inherited the Grottovoid Heaven in this generation. Apart from these three groups, all the main gods of the world of gods had already joined the battle. The four main gods of the darkness divine system who had attacked earlier appeared together. The goddess of nature, Daphne, and the lord of war, Eugene, arrived together. Even the beast god, whose divine body had been destroyed once, walked onto the battlefield with a gloomy expression. At this time, the Tao convergence practitioners of the world of gods naturally wouldn't hold back anymore. The battle between the two worlds had already reached the most critical stage. At this time, the battle between the main gods and those below the Tao convergence level had actually stopped. This was because everyone knew that the final outcome of the war would be decided by this battle in the gap between the two worlds. Everyone had found their opponent, but there was one person who wasn't so well behaved, and that was Ji Yunan. Ji Yunan smashed his fist toward Baya. The latter was already prepared, and his body was in a state of half-life and half-death. However, Ji Yunan's fist smashed into thin air. Baya swung his scythe in a reverse grip, and a dense aura of death surged out from the realm of the dead, wanting to drag Ji Yunan away from the world of the living. Ji Yunan grinned, and his body instantly disappeared into the shadows. His scythe similarly missed. In this round of exchange, neither side had gained the upper hand. Baya wasn't anxious either. As long as Ji Yunan appeared from the shadows, it would be impossible for him to escape his targeting. He knew that Ji Yunan's regenerative abilities were extremely powerful, but as the death god, he had a law that he could deal with as long as enough aura of death accumulated in Ji Yunan's body. The final detonation would definitely cause massive damage. The next moment, Ji Yunan's figure suddenly appeared on the other side, and he ruthlessly smashed his fist toward someone. Beast god Bridges. Bridges was practically about to spit out a mouthful of blood. Why was this lunatic looking for him again? This time, no one could help him stall for time. All the main gods had their own opponents to deal with. Only Baya was unoccupied, but when his scythe slashed down, Ji Yunan didn't even spare him a glance. The scene of a divine body exploding appeared again, and the pitiful beast god was blasted into smithereens once again. The price was that Ji Yunan had been hit by the scythe again. Moreover, Baya's reaction was extremely fast. When he swung his scythe, he was also attacking Bridges' enemy. This time, it was Ji Yunan's acquaintance, Mu Qishuang of Blue Sky Heaven. Mu Qishuang wasn't weak, but her laws were rather restrained by the death god, so she was barely able to withstand the scythe. Baya originally only had the idea of cutting his losses, but he didn't expect to have some unexpected gains. Hence, he immediately threw aside Ji Yunan, who was even more slippery than a loach, and focused on dealing with Mu Qishuang. In Baya's opinion, if he allowed Mu Qishuang to go against him, it probably wouldn't take long for her laws to be sliced into smithereens. Hence, Ji Yunan had to help. His thinking was basically correct, but would Ji Yunan care about Mu Qishuang's life? With a flash, Ji Yunan had already appeared where Daphne and Zhu Jiming were. Hence, Daphne was also blasted down by Ji Yunan's 3 consecutive punches without anyone's help. The vigilant Daphne dodged 2 punches, but there was no such thing as staying on guard for long. She was still blasted into smithereens by Ji Yunan. Damn it! Baya's eyes were filled with boundless killing intent, but his mind was extremely clear. He knew that it would be very difficult to capture Ji Yunan, who was shrouded in shadows, but he didn't expect him to completely disregard the lives of his comrades. Since that was the case, Baya forced Mu Qishuang away with a single slash. He ignored the other Tao integration stage powerhouses and headed straight for the battlefield of the 3 strongest powerhouses. Chapter 526. Read. Baya was very clear-headed. He knew that if he followed behind Ji Yunan, he would at most eat some of the dust. In the end, the entire battle would be dragged down by his tactics. Although this kind of tactic made him very angry, this was a battle to the death. Who cared about morality? Thus, Baya made the best choice. Since Ji Yunan liked to deal with ordinary chief gods, then he would force Zhao Renwang to retreat. If Boswell could also free up his hands, even if he had to compete with Ji Yunan in speed, his side would definitely have the advantage. Lord of Fangqing immediately understood Baya's meaning. He pointed his staff into the distance, and the sky full of green light became even denser. Even Zhao Runwang's human Tao King energy was suppressed. The Grim Reaper scythe attacked from behind. Zhao Runwang's mouth twitched. But he couldn't bring himself to ask Ji Yunan for help, so he could only try his best to hold on. But he was the weakest among the top 7. Now that he was being attacked by the two, how long could he last? With the tacit cooperation of Lord of Fangqing and the Grim Reaper, Zhao Renwang was hit by the Grim Reaper scythe 4 times. Baya directly detonated the death aura in his body, and his body instantly exploded. The damage caused by the Grim Reaper was not comparable to the damage caused by Ji Yunan's body. The death aura directly attacked Zhao Runwang's nomological laws, which could be considered to have injured his foundation. It could be said that Zhao Renwang would not be able to fight again in a short period of time. Taking advantage of the time that Baya and Boswell were dealing with Zhao Renwang, Ji Yunan continuously attacked the other main gods. His movements were extremely fast. Without the support of a top chief god, ordinary chief gods could not resist Ji Yunan's attacks at all. They were directly wiped out. The other 5 chief gods of the darkness god system were all injured. The most unlucky one, the beast god, had his divine body destroyed for the 3rd time. Nature goddess Daphne had also been destroyed twice. Even if the destruction of the divine body was slightly better than being attacked by the nomological laws, it also meant a large loss of godhood. It was impossible to ignore it. Baya and Lord of Fangqing exchanged a glance. They were very clear that with the characteristics of their nomological laws, it would not be easy to catch Ji Yunan. Since the other party wanted to exchange a life for a life, then so be it. Without any communication, the two of them pounced on a Dao integration cultivator next to them. It was Song Fei, who looked relatively weaker. Song Fei's nomological laws were useless in battle, and his cultivation base was not high either. Naturally, he was a pushover among the Dao integration cultivators. However, because of Ji Yunan's decisiveness, he was besieged. This was the most painful thing. Since when had Ji Yunan become so important? Song Fei was barely hanging on, and in the blink of an eye, he was killed by the two of them. His true spirit quickly returned to Shi Daotian, and he did not even have time to retract his laws. It wasn't that Song Fei didn't want to give it his all, but the combined might of 2 rank 14 overgods was not to be underestimated. When Baya and Boswell joined hands, their efficiency in defeating the Dao-fusing cultivators was no lower than that of Ji Yunan. In fact, the damage they could inflict was even greater. The beast god could appear again and again, but Song Fei did not dare to show himself again. Otherwise, he would really be in danger of dying. Baya and Boswell found Dream immortal. She had yet to recover from the injuries inflicted by Ji Yunan, so she was a good target. Ji Yunan also found the Lord of Nightmares, who had just returned. Austin and Daisy had Ju Po and Yu Lian to deal with, while Ji Yunan and Baya started a hunting competition. This was exactly what Ji Yunan wanted. Speaking of which, there was nothing he could do. After all, no one could capture Ji Yunan. If they did not start a hunting competition with him, could they just watch as Ji Yunan slaughtered over gods? On the other side, Yu Lian could already feel the pressure from the old senior. She did not even have the chance to throw out most of her Dao techniques before they were directly swallowed by the boundless darkness. If not for some secret techniques from the grottovoid heaven, perhaps she would have already been defeated and would not have been able to fight back. Ju Po and Austin were evenly matched, and neither could suppress the other in a short period of time. Ju Po was already on guard against justice, so he would not be easily defeated by Austin. With his strength, it was not a problem for him to stall the battle for now. Your people can't last much longer. Are you still not going to retreat? Ju Po smiled and pointed in a direction. In the direction he pointed, Daphne was once again targeted by Ji Yunan. Her power was starting to weaken, and she could not resist at all. Soon, Ji Yunan shattered her divine spark. If not for the war between the two worlds, she would have long hidden in the divine kingdom. Why would she come to die again and again? Austin's expression was cold. Aren't you the same? It's not the same. Ju Po shook his head and said seriously, Ji Yunan will kill people. There was a new change in the battle. After Ji Yunan killed Daphne again, he quickly left the battlefield and had no intention of appearing again. Baya and Master of Dark Azure looked at each other and immediately returned to the world of gods. When they arrived at the divine kingdom of nature, they saw that Ji Yunan was already there. His divine body is strong, but it is also a drawback, Baya said in a low voice. As long as we completely destroy him, he will not have the chance to interfere in this battle. In this battle, the two worlds would definitely have a winner. As long as they completely conquered the heavenly worlds, they would have time to deal with Ji Yunan. Boswell said in a low voice, "I will protect Daphne, you find an opportunity." Death nodded solemnly. If Ji Yunan wanted to kill, he would not flee. They all knew that this was the best opportunity. However, Baya soon realized that he did not need to deliberately find an opportunity, because Ji Yunan did not even think about hiding his actions. He stood openly in the divine kingdom of nature, and the law of shadows rapidly radiated outwards, engulfing all the living beings in the divine kingdom. Boswell once again raised his staff high, and the light of dark azure fell upon the divine kingdom of nature, rapidly protecting a portion of the living beings and constantly resisting Ji Yunan's law of shadows. In a pure confrontation of laws, Ji Yunan was not stronger than Master of Dark Azure. Ji Yunan also understood this, so his figure flickered and appeared behind Boswell, and he suddenly smashed his fist down. Baya, however, seemed to have long since anticipated this. He appeared in front of Ji Yunan in advance, and the death scythe blocked his path. A scene similar to the one before occurred. The scythe left a serious injury on Ji Yunan's body, but Ji Yunan's fist also smashed the scythe into pieces. However, with this delay, Master of Dark Azure was naturally able to retreat calmly. None of the lords would be negligent in battle. Ji Yunan just smiled. His figure rapidly flipped, and he punched out from all directions, all of them targeting Master of Dark Azure. Baya was like the most astute hunter. No matter which angle Ji Yunan attacked from, he could accurately block him. One more strike. Baya estimated the strength of his opponent's divine body. As long as he was hit by the scythe again, the eruption of the aura of death would be enough to completely destroy his opponent. The shadow appeared again, and Baya did not hesitate to strike heavily at Ji Yunan. That's enough. Baya's spirit was roused, and he immediately detonated the aura of death in Ji Yunan's body. However, Ji Yunan's subsequent actions startled him. It was as if Ji Yunan knew what he was going to do, and he flew in front of Boswell. Chapter 527. Read. Never in his wildest dreams would Boswell have imagined that Ji Yunan would use such a method to perish together with him. The aura of death had directly detonated within Ji Yunan's body. Although Ji Yunan was the first target, when he was close to the Pale Azure Lord, the latter naturally could not escape. Almost at the same time the aura of death erupted, Boswell felt a terrifying shock wave attack him. The power of the laws also erupted in an instant. With Baya's level, his attacks were naturally at the law level. His original intention was to kill Ji Yunan with this. At the very least, he wanted to completely destroy Ji Yunan's body and laws so that he could no longer participate in this battle. But now, Boswell had also become the target of this attack. He similarly could not withstand such a terrifying attack. The laws in his body collapsed almost instantly, and his divine body also fell apart. This was not because the Pale Azure Lord was too weak, but because the aura of death accumulated in Ji Yunan's body was simply too much. It could be said that ever since Baya became a lord, there had never been anyone who could withstand so many of his scythes and accumulate such a large amount of aura of death. Ordinary people, even if they were a lord, would have long been chopped into pieces after receiving so many scythes of death. But it was also because of Ji Yunan that Baya was able to accumulate such a terrifying aura of death. When it erupted, even Boswell found it hard to resist. Baya realized that he had been used by Ji Yunan, but his combat awareness was also quite astonishing. He rapidly restrained all his emotions and rushed toward the center of the aura of death. He did not believe that Ji Yunan would take the initiative to commit suicide. There was definitely another reason for him to do so. However, when Baya arrived at the center of the aura of death, he discovered that things were not that simple. Just like Boswell, Ji Yunan was blown into pieces by the aura of death. However, his flesh and blood were not completely corroded by the aura of death. Instead, They were rapidly mending together. After reaching the 13th rank, the strength of the heretic god's body had already exceeded the understanding of ordinary people. Just a drop of blood was enough to revive Ji Yunan. Baya's eyes narrowed. He rapidly manipulated the aura of death and used all his strength to corrode Ji Yunan's flesh and blood. Unfortunately, Ji Yunan was far more tenacious than he had imagined. The flesh and blood that were drifting around condensed in every detail, giving Baya no time to make a move. This was different from the previous 2 times Ji Yunan was surrounded. First, he was already at rank 13, and second, there was no daisy to interfere this time, so there was no top-notch law of darkness to suppress his recovery. In the blink of an eye, Ji Yunan's body was regenerating everywhere. To Baya's left, he saw a Ji Yunan with half of his head restored. To his right, he saw Ji Yunan with a reconstructed arm. Every part of Ji Yunan's body was as strong as a normal body. He didn't know which part to kill. Just a moment later, a complete Ji Yunan reappeared, and the destroyed law of shadows also gathered again. Ji Yunan even nodded at Baya as a sign of respect, revealing a friendly smile. If it weren't for this person's help, he wouldn't have been able to deal with Lord Ashen so easily. The next moment, Ji Yunan's figure disappeared again. The law of shadows once again enveloped the entire nature divine kingdom, and the entire Ji Yunan fell under his control. Baya tried to use the aura of death to fight against the shadows, but what followed was Ji Yunan's punch. A moment later, when Boswell barely managed to reform his divine body and arrived at the nature divine kingdom with his damaged laws, he could only see Baya standing there with an ashen expression. Lord Ashen sighed in his heart. He knew that their efforts were ultimately unable to stop the evil god's actions. Daphne, dead, Baya said with a sullen expression. Baya had watched helplessly as a main god died in front of him. This was the first time he had felt this powerless feeling of having a body full of laws and power but nowhere to release them. He had never seen an opponent like Ji Yunan. It was as if Ji Yunan was incomparably familiar with all his methods and had completely seen through his tactics. This was an extremely inconceivable thing. A main god's laws could be used in countless ways, many of which even they themselves weren't aware of. They were completely used according to the circumstances of the battle. However, Leylin could even predict these methods in advance. This was no longer something that could be explained by experience. Baya even suspected that this evil god had some sort of short-term foresight ability, which was why he was able to do such unimaginable things. But no matter what, Daphne still died in the hands of Ji Yunan. At this point, the light god system only had 3 main gods left. Other than Austin and Boswell, there was only the Lord of War Eugene. Meanwhile, Ji Yunan had already drifted far away. 3 main gods, Van Lun, Lorenza, and Daphne, had already died in his hands. His sin value had increased by a large margin. Originally, after killing 2 rank 11 main gods, he actually had some surplus in his sin value, which had exceeded the boundary of rank 13. But now, there was Daphne, who was at rank 12. His sin value had exceeded Van Lun and Lorenza by a little, but there was still a considerable distance to reach rank 14. There's still quite a gap. Ji Yunan looked at the increase in his sin value. The gap was still rather large. More importantly, the sin value that the main gods could provide was a number that fluctuated according to their levels. The fluctuation could be very large, and it was difficult to accurately estimate. Even if he calculated the maximum value, he had to at least get rid of the remaining 5 main gods of the darkness god system to have any hope of reaching rank 14. After coming to this conclusion, Ji Yunan could only shake his head lightly and speed up to the next god nation. That was the beast god Bridges god nation. In the gap between the 2 realms, Ju Po saw Austin's movements suddenly stop, and she could not help but smile. Seems like it has already begun. Ji Yunan had the ability to hunt down main gods alone, and he was extremely efficient. He would not leave any space for his target to escape. This was his strongest point. Moreover, his super recovery ability and the law of shadows ensured that very few people could stop Ji Yunan. When he attacked those who were weaker than him, no one could protect the latter. Of course, Austin knew that Ji Yunan had already killed Daphne and set off for the beast god's god nation. Meanwhile, Boswell had suffered serious injuries because of Ji Yunan's trap. "Let Bayer and the others come back," Austin suddenly said to Daisy. At the same time, he raised the golden scale and sent it to another battlefield. This time, the golden scale's target was Yu Lian, who was struggling to fight the Lady of Darkness. Daisy's expression turned cold, but her movements were not slow at all. The darkness that could devour everything instantly enveloped her. Austin's timing was very tricky. Yu Lian had to deal with Daisy's suppression, and she was already mentally and physically exhausted. She was instantly caught off guard. The golden scale landed on top of Yu Lian's head. This time, the scale was not used to control Yu Lian's power. Instead, it brought over a part of the darkness. And on the other side of the scale, there was already a ball of holy light shining. The combination of Austin and Daisy, the combination of light and darkness, an almost impossible and inconceivable combination, was achieved by Austin with fairness. Chapter 528. Read. A terrifying shockwave erupted from the gap between the two realms. Even Ju Po was affected by the collision of light and darkness. As the first target, Yu Lian was destroyed almost instantly. If Bayer were here, he would definitely have the feeling of "I've seen this episode before," because just now, Boswell had suffered a similar fate. Boswell's divine body was blown up by Ji Yunan's large amount of deathly aura. Yu Lian was also destroyed by the power of light and darkness. Yu Lian's injuries were not light either. She was not much worse off than Boswell. Ju Po was also affected. His figure instantly disappeared into the void, and when he came back, Austin and Daisy had both disappeared. Ju Po frowned. He quickly scanned the area with his divine soul to find the two lords. Then, he discovered a shocking fact. Austin and Daisy had taken Bayer with them. The three of them had charged into Zhao Runwang's divine Emperor Heaven. Did they not care about their nest? Ju Po was stunned for a moment, but he quickly understood their plan. They wanted to compete with Ji Yunan in terms of speed. They wanted to exchange the lives of lords and Dao integration cultivators. Those who could become top lords would not lose to anyone else when it came to ruthlessness towards their own people. Divine Emperor Heaven. Zhao Renwang was probably the most annoyed person now. For the sake of the overall situation, for the sake of tactics, sacrificing some individuals was a very normal thing, but when the person to be sacrificed was themselves, it was not something that anyone could accept. Moreover, he had no choice. It was the enemy who had chosen him. Even Ju Po would find it difficult to resist the joint attack of Austin, Daisy, and Bayer, let alone Zhao Renwang. Moreover, he had just been injured. In fact, if he was not in his astral boundary, he might not even have lasted the first round. He would have been killed by the three. Ju Po quickly returned to Divine Emperor Heaven to help Zhao Renwang stabilize the situation. If the three lords killed all the people of Divine Emperor Heaven, even Ju Po would not be able to save him. However, Zhao Renwang was having a hard time holding on. A large number of people in Divine Emperor Heaven were dying. Ju Po could not protect him. On the other hand, Austin and the other two were unstoppable. "Where's Yu Lian?" Zhao Renwang had already seen Ju Po. He questioned her loudly. Ju Po said solemnly, "Yu Lian was attacked by Austin and Daisy. Her injuries are probably worse than yours." Zhao Renwang opened his mouth, but no words came out. He knew very well that if even Yu Lian was injured like this, it would be very difficult for her to help him. After all, it was impossible for her to have the home advantage. If she came to the Divine Emperor Heaven to help, the three of them might immediately change their target and kill Yu Lian first. It had to be said that Austin's choice was very smart. The tactics he used seemed to be the same as Ji Yunan's, but Ji Yunan relied on the fact that he was hard to kill, and even harder to capture, so he slowly nibbled away at the various sovereigns. However, when Austin and the other two joined forces, no one could contend against them in terms of absolute strength. In terms of destructive power, they were far stronger than Ji Yunan. And at this critical moment, destructive power meant efficiency, and efficiency decided the outcome of the battle. On the other hand, Austin and the other two's super strength meant that they could directly go to the Divine Emperor Heaven, but Ji Yunan could not go to the Kangqing Divine Kingdom. With his level 13 nomological laws, If he wanted to destroy the Kang-Ching Divine Kingdom, Boswell did not even need to show himself. He could just use the nomological laws to resist him. Even if the master of Kang-Ching was only injured, he could still delay Ji Yunan for a long time. After all, that was his home ground. At the beginning of the war between the two worlds, the Pantheon world seemed to be at a disadvantage because two of their sovereigns had died first. However, their top-notch combat power was stronger than that of the celestial world. Now was the time to cut their losses, and they could make full use of this advantage. If both sides exchanged non-top-notch combat power, the final victor would undoubtedly be the Pantheon world. Austin's eyes were cold. His control of the nomological laws was extremely precise. He was like a war machine, purifying all the evil in the world. Zhao Renwang could only grit his teeth. He knew that all the Dao fusing experts were being held back. Yu Lian and Ji Yunan, who had the right to interfere in their battle, were already in trouble, and the other was in no mood to care about them. However, at this moment, an unexpected savior appeared. The sky above the Divine Emperor Heaven was suddenly covered by two huge shadows. Upon closer inspection, it was actually two giant dragons that traversed the horizon. Austin frowned and raised his head. However, he felt as if he was in a strange space. His control over his godhood and nomological laws had been weakened to an extremely low level. In this space, distance was pulled apart, time was compressed, and everything became extremely slow. The nomological laws broke away from the trio's control and were rapidly eroded by Ju Po's ley line power. The Divine Emperor Heaven instantly stabilized the situation. Lu Wen. Zhao Renwang raised his head in shock and saw Lu Wen's figure standing calmly in the sky. His seven-starred Daoist robe was still hanging on his body as he overlooked the battlefield below. The Pantheon world. Indeed, Ji Yunan's efficiency could not compare to Austin and the other two working together. At the same time, due to the strength of his own nomological laws, he could not directly find a top-notch lord. However, he was extremely adept at dealing with non-top-notch lords. The beast god's divine kingdom was already in an extremely dilapidated state. Bridges was gritting his teeth and holding on. The situation he was facing was even worse than Zhao Renwang's, because there was no one who could help him at all. Moreover, the unpredictable and unstoppable Ji Yunan brought him pressure that was no less than Austin and the other two. Another moment later, the beast god's divine kingdom was completely swallowed by the shadows. All the living beings either fled or were completely killed by Ji Yunan. Bridges was the only one left, a lone commander. Bridges stared coldly at Ji Yunan. He had held on until the very last moment, and then, he had run. That's right, he had waited until his divine kingdom had been completely destroyed by Ji Yunan to buy himself enough time. Then, without another word, he had turned and run. Back when Austin had come up with the strategy of exchanging positions, he had already issued an order to all the lords. If they encountered a demon god targeting someone, then they were to think of a way to buy time and then run. If the divine kingdom was destroyed, it could be rebuilt. As long as they could protect themselves, as long as they won this battle, they would have a chance to start over. This was a battle where the two worlds were betting everything they had. No one could stay out of it. As Ji Yunan watched Bridges' disappearing figure, a strange smile appeared on his face. If he thought that he could escape just like that, then he was really too naive. His figure disappeared on the spot, and then he quickly invaded the Holy Light Divine Kingdom. He found a familiar god and appeared before her. Chapter 529. Reading. Under normal circumstances, Ji Yunan would not be interested in entering the Holy Light Kingdom. This was Austin's base camp. Not only was there extreme Holy Light nomological laws everywhere, but it was also easy to attract Austin himself. For example, Ji Yunan had entered the Holy Light Kingdom to attract Austin's attention and make him leave a mark on him so that he could lure Austin to the Divine Emperor Heaven. This time, he also had a special goal, and that goal was Sylvia. Ever since the war between the two worlds broke out, Sylvia had been kept in the Holy Light Kingdom by her brother in case she was kidnapped and turned into a hostage. After all, the Holy Light Country was the safest place in any other place. Unfortunately, even if Austin discovered the abnormality in the Holy Light Kingdom at this critical moment, he would not be able to rescue her in time. Ju Po and Zhao Renwang would not let him leave so easily. Even if he could leave, his invasion of the divine Emperor Heaven would be in vain. In just a split second of hesitation, Sylvia had already been taken away by Ji Yunan. Worlds in the heavens. Austin sensed what was happening in the Holy Light Kingdom, and his expression suddenly turned cold. However, he also knew that it was too late to return now. Therefore, his purification of the divine Emperor Heaven became much more intense. Even Daisy and Bayer could not understand it. Did Austin have a personal feud with Zhao Renwang? On the other side, Sylvia was captured by Ji Yunan without any preparation. At this moment, she was glaring at Ji Yunan fiercely. "Evil God, just kill me," Sylvia shouted. "Don't think that I will tell you anything, and don't think that you can threaten my brother." Sylvia did not need to think too much about Ji Yunan's purpose in capturing her. Of course, it was for her brother. However, she was wrong. What Ji Yunan wanted to do did not require her cooperation. He only needed her god's blood. Sylvia's nomological laws were completely sealed. She felt her vision blur, and she was brought to a dilapidated Holy Light Kingdom by Ji Yunan. If it wasn't for the fact that there were still some patterns left in the god's palace and that Sylvia had been to the beast deity's divine kingdom before, she wouldn't have believed that this was once the kingdom of a god. "Beast god," Sylvia murmured. The next moment, she felt a sharp pain on her wrist. She had been cut by the shadow blade, and divine blood was flowing out of her wrist incessantly. "You." As soon as Sylvia opened her mouth, her voice was sealed by Ji Yunan, and she couldn't say a single word. The divine body of a god was closely related to the divine title, and the blood of a god was even more precious than the blood of a dragon. It could even be said that the blood of a god itself came with an extremely strong power of laws. Sylvia's divine blood was absorbed by Ji Yunan, and an extreme shadow was rapidly produced. It then followed the beast god patterns in the main shrine and extended a strange path in the void. Looking at this route, Sylvia could not help but widen her eyes. After all, this was something that extended from her body. She could vaguely feel what the end of this line was pointing to. That was Bridges, the beast god Bridges. My blood. Why does it have such power? Sylvia was in disbelief. Not only was she puzzled by the phenomenon itself, but she was even more puzzled by how Ji Yunan knew about it. Of course, she could not bring herself to ask this, but Ji Yunan seemed to understand what she was thinking. He said with a faint smile, "Austin is already the embodiment of laws. You, who are connected to him by blood, naturally have this characteristic as well. In the laws of the world of gods, bloodlines were an extremely close connection. When a god ascended to a new realm, all of his relatives and children would receive a certain upgrade. It was not a coincidence that the children of God usually had greater talent than the average person. Even though this upgrade was hidden, and most of the time, even the relatives themselves could not feel it. Of course, Sylvia knew this, but it was even rarer for a god to receive an upgrade because of his bloodline. Because of Austin, Sylvia also possessed the characteristics of laws. To a certain extent, her blood represented the shadow. And the law of shadow itself had the ability to track. This was common knowledge. Ji Yunan had yet to reach level 15 and reach the pinnacle of nomological assimilation, so he could only borrow Sylvia's power for now. Bridges was hiding in a small plain, looking at his broken god nation while gnashing his teeth. He was doing his best to hide himself, hoping that they would win the war so that they could go all out to encircle this damned evil god. Thus, when the strange black thread slowly connected before him, Bridges had yet to realize what had happened. He only felt a pain at the back of his head. Ji Yunan's figure had appeared beside him at some point in time and landed a punch. Bridges did not even have time to react to this unguarded sneak attack. His divine body was instantly blasted apart, leaving nothing behind. The terrifying explosive power of the evil god's body was used to its pinnacle in a sneak attack. A lord had fallen in an instant. Ji Yunan harvested sin points once again, and then immediately set off for the next god kingdom. This time, his target was the Devil King Stanley. Bridges is dead. Austin's voice rang out again, this time with a rare gloomy tone. They had clearly been prepared, but Ji Yunan had still managed to kill a lord. The development of the situation had already exceeded his expectations. Exchanging a Lord's God kingdom for the life of the enemy's Tao integration deity, or taking advantage of the enemy's lack of organization, was rather worthwhile. However, exchanging a life for a life was not worth it. But now that things had come to this, Austen and the others had no chance to turn back. They were riding a tiger and could not back down. The Lady of Darkness, Daisy, said with a sullen expression, "We can only rely on them to stall for time. Let's speed up." Bayer did not speak, but he used his actions to prove his attitude. The deathly aura started to spread wildly across the divine Emperor Heaven. Bayer no longer cared about his own exhaustion. Lu Wen was still standing in mid-air, using space-time laws to stall Austen and the others. But in a battle of this level, surprise attacks could only be used once. After the first wave of space-time laws was destroyed, it was very difficult for him to set up another one. The pressure on Ju Po and Zhao Renwang was getting greater and greater. Even with Lu Wen's help, they were only able to delay the destruction of the divine Emperor Heaven by a little. For someone to be able to interfere in a fight of such a level was already an unexpected occurrence. Hoping for Lu Wen to have the ability to turn the tides was truly too much of a burden. Give up. Ju Po sighed at Zhao Renwang. The astral boundary can still be rebuilt if it's destroyed. If Austen could understand this logic, the other Tao integration deities naturally understood it as well. It was a pity that the lords could make such a decision, but Zhao Renwang could not. The reason was very simple. The divine Emperor Heaven had been passed down for countless years before finally falling into his hands. Chapter 530. Read. Leave, Zhao Renwang said through gritted teeth. Even if I die, I will only die here. Ju Po sighed again. He did not try to persuade Zhao Renwang any further. He calmed down and decided to fight the three lords until the very last moment. This was not because Ju Po was being kind. After all, he did not feel any pressure. The longer he stayed in divine Emperor Heaven, the safer he would be. In the grand scheme of things, the longer divine Emperor Heaven was destroyed, the better the situation would be for the heavenly planes. It was still a race against time. Would Ji Yunan kill all the lords first, or would Austen and the other two deal with the main forces of the heavenly planes first? Ji Yunan had already arrived at Demon King Stanley's God Kingdom. In the mortal world, it was a strange plane known as the Demon Realm. That's right, the world of gods did have a demon realm. However, the Demon Realm was not a primary plane, but the God Kingdom of the previous Demon Kings. When the God Kingdom was targeted by Ji Yunan, Stanley immediately returned from the two-realm battlefield. However, what was rare was that he did not passively defend like the beast god. Instead, he revealed himself and stood in front of Ji Yunan. The Demon King was a rank 13 Lord God. He was considered one of the more senior lords among the lords. More importantly, he was very confident in himself. Choosing me as your next target will be the worst decision you've ever made. Stanley stood calmly in front of Ji Yunan and said with a faint smile, "You will be the sinner of this war." Of course, his reply was a punch from Ji Yunan. No one could use their body to take a punch from Ji Yunan. Of course, Stanley could not either. His body was instantly destroyed by Ji Yunan, but then another Stanley appeared. The Demon King's uniqueness was that as long as his power was not exhausted, he was almost immortal. His godheads were different from those of ordinary lords. They were scattered among the demons in the God Kingdom. It could be said that every demon was the source of his power. It's useless. Stanley shook his collar and smiled at Ji Yunan. All your power is in your body. How are you going to kill me? Ji Yunan shattered Stanley's body with another punch, and then took out a blood-red bead from his bosom. This was the divine country orb that he had used to store the terpsichore when he was at the second transition. Now that the terpsichore had been completely destroyed, all that was left were traces of the blood sacrifice. However, the divine kingdom orb was once again empty, so Ji Yunan used it to deal with Stanley. Ji Yunan pressed the orb of the God Kingdom into the ground and then stood there unhurriedly, watching Stanley, who had reappeared. This time, it was Stanley's turn to panic. The Divine Nation Pearl was just an ordinary tool. Regardless of its difficulty in obtaining it or its effects, It was basically at the level of a first transition item. Normally speaking, there was no way it could be used against sovereigns. In other words, during the normal course of the game, this item had never housed a main god's divine kingdom. This was not a problem of the upper limit of the item's strength. It was simply impossible. If he did that, he would immediately be surrounded and attacked by all of the sovereigns, and the collection process would be forced to come to a halt. No player would be able to deal with the combined attacks of the sovereigns. On the contrary, after the existence of the myriad worlds and the start of the war between the two worlds, Ji Nan had the opportunity to do whatever he wanted. After putting down the Divine Kingdom Pearl, Ji Nan activated it with his current powers. The demonic world was sucked into the Divine Kingdom Pearl at a speed visible to the naked eye. Stanley did not have the time to make sarcastic remarks. He started to activate the laws in a frenzy, and many demonic shadows pounced toward the Divine Kingdom Pearl in an attempt to prevent it from being engulfed. However, a demon king was a demon king after all. His godhead had given him an inexhaustible amount of power, but it also dispersed his explosive power. With Ji Nan holding the fort, no matter how many demonic shadows came, they would just be sending themselves to their deaths. From another perspective, others might have the chance to abandon the Divine Kingdom and escape, but Stanley would not be able to do so even if he wanted to. This was because once he lost the Divine Kingdom, it would be equivalent to losing over 90% of his powers. He might not even be considered a main god anymore. A short while later, amidst Stanley's tragic bellows, the entire demonic world was sucked into the Divine Kingdom Pearl. Stanley originally had the chance to escape, but he did not choose to do so in the end. Instead, he followed his Divine Kingdom into the Divine Kingdom Pearl. Although he would be sealed this way, it was still better than losing most of his powers. After all, there was still hope of breaking the seal and escaping. However, he did not know that Ji Nan's goal was not just to get him to leave the battlefield, but to actually kill them all. After keeping the demonic world, Ji Nan tossed the Divine Kingdom Pearl in his hand, and then suddenly slapped it. The Divine Kingdom Pearl shattered without any suspense. Divine Emperor Heaven. The situation had reached its final moments. The three main gods had already occupied more than half of the astral world, and Zhao Renwang could only defend his last bit of territory. It could be said that at this point, there was no longer any meaning in whether he stayed or not, because the living beings in the astral world had already been wiped out. However, Zhao Renwang still had no intention of leaving. This was the human emperor. In ancient times, the human emperor had cut his way through the barren mountains and unruly rivers to carve out a path of survival. Now, there was no turning back. Let's go. Ju Po came to Lu Wen's side and said. Divine Emperor Heaven no longer had any value, and they had to quickly adjust themselves to deal with the three main gods' next attack. Lu Wen nodded, and his figure retreated from Divine Emperor Heaven without hesitation. It was time for him to consider his own safety. Because looking at the other party's posture, after he took the lead this time, he might be the next to suffer. However, there was no other way. If he did not take action in Divine Emperor Heaven, the other astral worlds would not be able to withstand it. However, Lu Wen was better than Zhao Renwang in that he had made the decision to abandon the astral world. If he had no other choice, he had already made the preparations to abandon the astral world and run directly to the world of gods to participate in the extermination of the ordinary main gods. Victory was right before their eyes, and even Ju Po and Lu Wen had retreated. Austin and the other two could finally heave a sigh of relief. Finish off Divine Emperor Heaven as soon as possible, Austin emphasized. Daisy and Bayer nodded at the same time. However, at this moment, Bayer's figure suddenly froze, and an expression of disbelief appeared on his face. The astral world has disappeared, and Stanley is dead. Austin suddenly turned his head, and stared at Bayer's face. If stalling for time was their method of dealing with Ji Nan, then Stanley's demonic world was a trap. As long as Ji Nan stepped into it, he would definitely waste a lot of time. Given the complexity of the demonic world, even if Austin personally went there, he would not be able to take it down in a short period of time. But now, how did Ji Nan do it? Daisy said in a low voice, the heretic god is a creature from ancient times. Perhaps he knows some secrets that we do not. You believe it? Austin looked at Daisy calmly, his gaze cold. You want to retreat? Chapter 531. Read. When she learned that Stanley had died at Ji Yunan's hands, Daisy had indeed thought of retreating. No matter what, their top-notch battle prowess was stronger than that of the All Heavens. A battle between lords could not be decided by numbers. It was not too late to retreat now. More importantly, there were not many people left in the Darkness God system. Apart from herself and Baya, the Darkness God system had a total of 5 lords. Now that Beast God Bridges and Demon King Stanley had both died at Ji Yunan's hands, the Darkness God system only had the Lord of Nightmares and 2 others left. But the Light God system seemed to be in a worse state. Even Austin had to persevere. Daisy could only grit her teeth and follow. At a time like this, the world of gods had to be united. Shall we go to Shijitian next? Baya asked. He hated that fellow who had interfered with their plans to the bone. But Austin said, no, we'll start elsewhere. Lu Wen's abilities will only be better in Shijitian. Even though he also wanted to tear Lu Wen to pieces, Austin's mind was still clear. What they lacked the most now was time. They had to kill as many Dao integration practitioners as possible in the shortest time possible. They targeted the Divine Emperor Heaven because Zhao Renwang had already suffered serious injuries and was not as strong as Yu Lian and Ju Po. He was the most cost-effective target. More importantly, if they did not think of a way to force him back, they would not be able to hold on the main battlefield. Boswell had already returned to the Two-Realm battlefield and joined forces with Eugene and the 3 Darkness Lords. Only after Lu Wen returned did they manage to fend off the attacks of the many Dao integration practitioners. This was the result even after the Master of Dark Azure had risked his life and defeated Li Ci and Hua Kuei of the Army Destroyer Heaven. Austin had a good grasp of the overall situation and immediately led the 2 to their next target, Martial Soldier Heaven. Is it Zhu Jiming's turn? Ji Yunan naturally noticed the situation over at the All Heavens battlefield. He could not help but smile when he saw that Austin and the other 2 had already switched battles. Zhu Jiming, who was on the Two-Realm battlefield, naturally rushed back to his astral realm. In any case, the All Heavens battlefield still had the advantage and there was no pressure for now. But Ji Yunan knew that as the number of people on both sides decreased, this advantage would become smaller and smaller. For the fewer people he had to deal with, the more sure Boswell would be. The gap between the top combat powers of the 2 sides was now beginning to show. Just one of the 4 peak overgods was enough to keep most people busy on the main battlefield. And right now, in front of Ji Yunan stood another sovereign. To be more precise, it was only the shadow of a prime god. Not everyone had the courage to stand in front of Ji Yunan with thousands of incarnations like Stanley. Koche Sai, long time no see. Ji Yunan's law of shadows continued to spread outwards, but his mouth was unhurriedly greeting Kotsis. That's right, he was now standing in the Nightmare Kingdom. His next target was the Lord of Nightmares, Kosisi. No, it should be Ji Yunan's next 3 targets. After showing up in the Nightmare Kingdom and greeting Kotsisi, he went directly to the Storm Kingdom. The Storm Overgod, Learman, was shocked and hurriedly returned from the Two-Realm battlefield, but a small number of his people had already been killed by the shadows. Next was naturally the Styx Kingdom. The Lord of the Styx River, Ogiast, seemed to understand Ji Yunan's plan. He resisted the urge to return and stayed on the battlefield for a while longer. In the end, Ji Yunan simply stayed in the Styx Kingdom. The Shadow Overgod spread his law of shadows at an extremely fast speed, killing off groups of Styx believers. Therefore, the Lord of the Styx River had no choice but to abandon the main battlefield and rush back to his own god kingdom. Ji Yunan's move forced the 3 Dark Pantheon Lords to return, greatly increasing the pressure on the main battlefield. Boswell and Eugene were struggling to hold on. Austin and the others had also noticed Ji Yunan's actions, but there was nothing they could do. This was because only Ji Yunan could play such tricks. Only someone like Ji Yunan, who was incomparably familiar with the world of gods, could freely travel between the 3 god kingdoms. On the other hand, Austin and the other 2 were completely clueless about the world of gods. It was already difficult for them to find an astral plane, So how could they have the ability to come and go without a trace? With the 9 spirits around, they could completely block their space teleportation and waste even more time. Therefore, a large army had its advantages, and a guerrilla had its advantages. In terms of strategy, both sides were trying their best to make use of their own strengths. Just like that, Ji Yunan wandered between the 3 god kingdoms, not giving him a chance to catch his breath. Surprisingly, his progress was not much slower than if he were to go alone. This was also some of the experience Ji Yunan had gained from dealing with the beast god. Ji Yunan realized that when he used the law of shadows to kill the gods, most of the time was not spent on killing, but on gambling with the enemy lords. He would look for places that were not protected by the lords to attack, and find gaps in the protective zone. When Ji Yunan was operating on multiple fronts, this time was saved and used in another god kingdom. It was no wonder that Ji Yunan did not think of this at first. After all, in the game, he rarely encountered such a perfect farming opportunity. At most, he would fight some guerrilla warfare, and he would not think about saving time. Ji Yunan was progressing at lightning speed, but Austin and the other 2 worked hard, and their progress was no slower than Ji Yunan's. In just a short while, because Zhu Jiming was not as strong as Zhao Renwang, the martial soldier heaven was broken in the blink of an eye, and he could only abandon his astral plane and escape. Austin and the other 2 had no intention of pursuing him, because they had already achieved their goal. The Dao integration practitioners who had lost their astral plane definitely did not dare to show up in this battle, which was equivalent to losing their combat strength. Because if they dared to show up, they would definitely face the combined attacks of the elite lords. Next, Austin said coldly. The Dao integration practitioners were forced back one by one, and then their astral planes were destroyed one by one. The originally glorious 16 heavens became a land of death for a while. Even in the astral realms that had yet to be attacked, a large number of residents with considerable strength had fled. This was because no one knew if they would be the next to suffer. On the other hand, Ji Yunan's god kingdom remained calm and peaceful. No one could enter, and Austin had no intention of attacking. This logic was the same as his untouched Paradise Heaven and 9 Souls Heaven. The Star Lords of these 3 astral planes were too powerful, and if they had the home advantage, they could very well drag them to death. At most, it would be meaningless for another person to attack the world of gods. This was the problem of a lack of information. If they understood the mechanism of the evil gods, they would definitely not have such a foolish idea. Unfortunately, no one else in this world understood the evil gods. Chapter 532. Read. 2 14th gods and 1 15th god joined forces. In terms of the speed of nomological erosion, they naturally far surpassed Ji Yunan. If not for the fact that they had to take down the Divine Emperor Heaven, Austin and the other 2 would have been much faster. They would not have given Ji Yunan enough time. In the heavenly worlds, only the 9 spirits heaven, the grotto void heaven, and Ji Yunan's god nation were still intact among the 16 star realms. Even Lu Wen had been massacred by the 3 overgods at the final juncture, and had no choice but to hide in an unknown little plane. Let's go back and force the heretic gods to retreat, then come back. Austin quickly made a decision. His expression was no longer as solemn as before. Judging from the current battle situation, the world of gods had obtained a great advantage through the correct operation of their strategy. Among the ordinary lords, only Eugene was left, but the world of gods had been completely wiped out. As for the top-notch lords, the world of gods had the advantage from the beginning. Although Boswell had been injured because he had to delay the battle, he had not completely lost his combat power. On the other hand, Austin's initial decision to take down the Divine Emperor Heaven showed that he was right. Without Zhao Renwang of the Divine Emperor Heaven, the world of gods only had 9 spirits, Ji Yunan, and a half-crippled Yu Lian. How could they fight the world of gods? The only thing that the lords found hard to accept was that a large number of lords had died at Ji Yunan's hands. Austin can't save you. Ji Yunan appeared before Kotsis again with a cold smile on his face. He knew what had happened in the world of gods, but it was too late for Austin and the other 2 to return. The Storm God Nation and the Styx God Nation had fallen completely, and 2 lords had escaped. Only the God Nation of the Nightmare Lord was left. Due to its unique nature, Ji-Yunan had placed it last. Kotsis only smiled calmly. He was one of the first lords to come into contact with Ji-Yunan, and he had personally witnessed Ji-Yunan's ascension to Dao integration. Kotsis had been prepared since the start of the war. He was just trying to buy time as much as possible, and at the same time, he was considering how to escape after the divine kingdom was destroyed. The death of the beast god and the demon king had already given Kotsis a wake-up call, letting him know that abandoning the divine kingdom and escaping wasn't absolutely safe. But after all, he did not know how Ji-Yunan had done it. A more normal thought was that he had been intercepted by Ji-Yunan in the process of escaping. As for being able to track down a sovereign, that was just too bizarre. The nightmare divine kingdom eventually collapsed. Kusi sighed lightly. He didn't have time to wait for Austin and the other two to return. His figure instantly disappeared into the dream. For a special main god like him, the dream world was undoubtedly safer than any other place. Ji-Yunan seemed to be just as he thought, unable to confirm his whereabouts, and never showed up again. However, after a short while, the Lord of Nightmares received successive news. The Lord of Storms and the Lord of the Styx River had also died in the hands of Ji-Yunan. Up until now, counting from Van Lun and Lorenza, as many as 6 main gods had died in the hands of Ji-Yunan. It could be said that in this war between the two worlds, everyone was in a state of losing everything. The only thing that mattered was who had lost less. Only Ji-Yunan had profited greatly. Only you are left. Ji-Yunan had already determined Kotsis's location through Sylvia's blood as he murmured. The progress of his sin value was similar to what he had expected. From the 13th to the 14th rank, he needed about 5 main gods. And the Lord of Nightmares, Kotsis, was the current 5th main god. Advancing to the 12th and 13th ranks didn't help Ji-Yunan as much as he had imagined, because the improvement of the laws was mainly in the aspect of accumulation. But the 14th rank was different. If the 15th rank was the limit of the main gods, the embodiment of the laws, then the 14th rank was already beginning to have some clues. For example, the Lady of Darkness Daisy, the god of death Baya, and the others were actually at the 14th rank, and their every move could already directly affect the laws themselves. Once they reached the 15th rank, which was Austin's realm, they themselves represented the will of the laws. Evil. God. You won't succeed. Sylvia stared coldly at Ji-Yunan, struggling to speak. Perhaps it was because Ji-Yunan had attracted too much attention when he was wandering around the 3 divine nations, but she actually had a chance to speak. However, the large amount of blood loss caused Sylvia's face to turn pale. The effects of a god losing divine blood was even more severe than a normal person losing blood. Ji-Yunan smiled at her, and the shadow blade instantly slashed across Sylvia's neck. This shadow goddess who had lived for tens of thousands of years had finally died under the shadow. Ji-Yunan had already collected enough divine blood, and Sylvia was no longer of any value to him. Austin, who was rushing back to the world of gods, froze as if he had sensed something, and his eyes flashed with cold killing intent. Who did he kill this time? Daisy saw his expression and could not help but ask. Sylvia, Austin said coldly. Dreamscape. As a plane that relied on the existence of the main world, there were some special lifeforms here. The Lord of Nightmares descended with the power of a lord, and could naturally control most of the dreamscape creatures. It was almost like a home field. Ji-Yunan was well aware of this, which was why he had left Kotsis until the end to ensure that nothing went wrong. A fist suddenly fell from the void, but it did not kill him instantly like before. Instead, it seemed to have hit a nightmare, and it directly passed through Kotsis' body. Kotsis was prepared. Everyone knew that he would hide in Dreamscape, and Ji-Yunan obviously knew as well. Hence, he did not dare to let his guard down for even a moment. Ji-Yunan was not dejected, and he was also prepared for it. The Lord of Nightmares was one of the most difficult lords to kill with his body, even if his fists were already half nomological. The best way to deal with dreams had always been laws. Endless shadows began to spread from beneath Ji-Yunan's feet, and quickly wrapped around Kotsis. Dreamscape provided Kotsis with a home field advantage, but at the same time, it was like a cage that prevented him from escaping. In the eyes of all the lords, Ji-Yunan was still a newly ascended evil god. His strength lay in his inconceivable body, and the law of shadows provided him with more concealment. Very few people would notice that he was already at the 13th level. He was at the same level as Kotsis, but his law was a shadow that came from the same source as light. This in itself represented unparalleled power. Hence, when Kotsis realized that the entire dreamscape was quickly swallowed by the shadows, he knew that things were not going well. The law of shadows, which was supposed to be deep and obscure, was indescribably domineering in Ji Yunan's hands. This was not like a shadow, but more like Daisy's all-devouring darkness. At this moment, a ray of holy light cut into dreamscape and landed in front of Kotsis, attempting to block the spreading shadows. Chapter 533. Read. By the time Austin arrived at the dreamscape, the world had already collapsed under Ji Yunan's influence. With his current level 13 laws, it was all too easy for him to destroy a demiplane. Even with Kotsis, who was at the same level as him, it was still much easier to destroy than to defend. Without the protection of the dreamscape, the Nightmare Lord was even weaker than other gods of the same level. In the blink of an eye, he died under Ji Yunan's fist. At this point, more than half of the 13 main gods of the world of gods had died, all at the hands of Ji Yunan. Other than the 4 top-notch core deities from the 2 great divine branches, Eugene was the only core deity still alive. Austin's figure slowly appeared in front of Ji Yunan, followed by the Lady of Darkness, Daisy, and the God of Death. Their gazes were cold and determined. The deaths of so many main gods did not cause them to retreat. Instead, they were even more determined to kill this evil god. Now that things had come to this, there was no longer any need for them to communicate. It was already a matter of life and death. Words had lost all meaning. Austin was the first to attack. He felt pity for his sister's death, hatred for the evil god, and pity for the world. As the embodiment of the holy light, he had a reason to eliminate all evil in this world. The holy sword streaked across the void and landed in front of Ji Yunan in the blink of an eye. Austin did not expect to kill Ji Yunan with a single strike. He only wanted to stop Ji Yunan from escaping. Against the 3 of them, even Ju Po would have to retreat. He could not think of any reason for Ji Yunan to face them head-on. However, he was destined to be wrong this time. Ji Yunan had no intention of dodging. He just stood there without moving. The holy sword fell at a seemingly slow pace, but before it could reach Ji Yunan, it was as if it had cut into a ball of mud. Its speed suddenly slowed until it completely disappeared. This time, Ji Yunan did not use the evil god's body. He only used the power of the laws to devour the holy sword. Level 14, Daisy, who was standing behind Austin, saw everything clearly, and her voice was filled with incredulity. Ji Yunan had become an over-god just over a decade ago. In the blink of an eye, he was already on equal footing with him. Baya felt that this was even more inconceivable, because he had just fought with Ji Yunan. He was certain that Ji Yunan had not reached this level at that time. Could it be that he had just advanced? Austin looked at Ji Yunan in silence. After a moment, he slowly said, "We might have made a mistake. So the growth of an evil god is achieved by killing gods." Hearing Austin's words, Daisy and Baya looked at each other in sudden realization. They finally understood the secret behind all this. But what followed was the fear and murderous intent towards his natural enemy. Gods and evil gods were indeed 2 beings that could not coexist. After killing the Nightmare Lord, Ji Yunan's sin value had already reached the 14th rank. His laws and body began to advance at the same time, constantly advancing towards the 14th rank. But his breakthrough this time wasn't accomplished overnight. Instead, it was a fast and visible process. Ji Yunan could feel himself becoming stronger at every moment. This feeling was enough to make an ordinary person lose themselves, but Ji Yunan was able to remain clear-headed. I said, "It's too late." Ji Yunan tilted his neck, and his bones cracked. The next moment, without waiting for the 3 to react, Ji Yunan's body had already appeared in front of Baya, and he heavily punched him in the abdomen. Baya was already on high alert and didn't dare to be negligent. Boundless death aura immediately gushed out, trying to block Ji Yunan for an instant. This choice was no different from Daphne's. As long as he could block Ji Yunan for an instant, it would be enough for Baya to escape the danger zone. More importantly, he had two companions with him this time. The instant Ji-Yunan was stopped by the death aura was enough for them to make a move. But what Baya didn't expect was that Ji-Yunan's fist would break through the death aura without any hindrance. It was as if he wasn't affected at all, and his fist directly hit Baya. No one could withstand a punch from Ji-Yunan. This iron law was also effective on the death god. Hence, Baya's divine body shattered like a watermelon. The death god's laws instantly exploded, and the terrifying shockwave even sent Austin and Daisy flying. After countless law fragments fell, only Ji-Yunan was left standing in place. Baya's divine body had already been destroyed, and he had also lost a portion of his godhead. Even for a 14th rank god like Baya, the loss of a divine body signified the loss of his godhead. This was something that made his heart ache. Austin didn't say a word. The holy sword in his hand appeared again, and he slashed at Ji-Yunan's back. At the same time, a golden scale appeared in midair and directly fell on top of Ji-Yunan's head. He had already treated Ji-Yunan as a true opponent, and he was using everything he had to deal with him. Even Ju Po had suffered under this move. Later on, even though he knew of the existence of justice, Ju Po actually couldn't do anything to Austin. He could only passively stall him. Up until the battle at Divine Emperor Heaven, Ju Po had actually been the one being restrained by Austin. Only after Ju Po's strength had been suppressed did Austin go and deal with Zhao Renwang. But when it came to Ji-Yunan, the situation was different. The moment the golden scale descended, one end was already covered in dense holy light, while the other began to frantically absorb Ji-Yunan's law of shadows. This was one of the uses of justice. Austin's own law of holy light was equivalent to his opponent's law of shadows. Both were bound to the scale and could not be used. In this world, he was the only 15th rank over God. Thus, by relying on the quantity of laws that surpassed everyone else, this move of Austin's had always been successful. Ji-Yunan raised his head. As the golden scale began to absorb the shadows, his body suddenly flashed, and his entire body hid in the shadows. For him, who was at the 14th rank, when he merged with the shadows, it was equivalent to becoming one with the laws. Austin immediately felt a great obstruction in his absorption of the shadows. This was because Ji-Yunan's body had affected the will of the shadows, causing the laws to be able to resist justice. If it were any other over God, Austin would definitely persist to the end and directly seal the other party into the golden scale. But Ji-Yunan was different. His body was too powerful, and even Austin could not afford to use the same amount of power. The reason why justice was that Austin himself had to abide by the laws. In fact, due to the protection of justice, no one could harm Ji-Yunan in this state unless the golden scale was destroyed first. Left with no choice, Austin could only withdraw justice. At the very least, he would not use this method to deal with Ji-Yunan. Chapter 534. Read. Austin was known as the Lord of Light and Justice. The power he displayed was mostly holy light, and he rarely used the power of justice. On one hand, he didn't need it, and on the other, he was doing his best to hide his trump card from others. Even if Ji-Yunan was the reincarnation of an ancient evil god and knew some of the secrets of the world of gods, how could he understand the law of justice? Even in the vast history of the world of gods, there had never been another god of justice. It could be said that this was a law unique to Austin. But now was not the time to think about this. The power of the evil god had exceeded everyone's imagination. He had to destroy him in this battle. The golden scale was temporarily withdrawn, but the holy sword struck again, and Daisy acted at the same time. Darkness and shadows intertwined, and the two merged in the void. They were almost indistinguishable, but the clash of laws was very distinct, and they seemed out of place. The holy sword slashed down, directly cutting the two apart, but it accurately slashed at Ji-Yunan's shadow line. The law of shadows trembled slightly, and ripples spread out. Not only did it avoid the holy sword's attack, but it also broke away from the darkness. Ji-Yunan's figure flashed and appeared next to Daisy. The entire process seemed uneventful. His control over the laws had reached an unimaginable level. Daisy could not help but exchange a look with Austin. She was more and more convinced that he was the reincarnation of an evil god. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how he could control the laws so well. Ji Nan only smiled, and his figure had already begun to retreat. He had already gotten what he wanted in this battle. The 4 top lords were not that easy to kill, so he might as well go back and make preparations. More importantly, Ji Nan, who was already at the 14th level, had enough power to flatten the entire world and make everyone act according to his will. Without the pressure of survival, Ji Nan was now most interested in the mysteries of the original realm. He really wanted to see if he could forcefully break the barrier between the original realm and the outside world with his current power. However, just as Ji Nan tried to retreat, a Grim Reaper's scythe suddenly landed on the back of his head. The violent aura of death almost knocked him down. Courting death. Ji Nan revealed a sneer and turned around without hesitation. He actually used his face to receive the scythe. Baya had just reconstructed his body and rushed over, but he hadn't expected Ji Nan to respond in such a manner. He didn't have enough time to change his attack. As for Ji Nan, he allowed the sickle to slash at his face. His right hand suddenly reached out and pressed down on Baya's head, forcibly twisting this death god's head off. It had been a long time since Baya had encountered an enemy who had specifically come to engage in close combat with Ji Nan. Baya was the first one he had encountered recently. His goal might be to stall for time and sacrifice himself to create an opportunity for Austin and Daisy. Unfortunately, he didn't know that these two didn't stand a chance against Ji Nan either. Between opponents of the same level, it was too difficult to make them stay. Ji Nan had previously searched for the Lord Gods because he had destroyed their god nations. That was how he had been able to use this as a lead. Ji Nan dealt with Baya with a slap, not giving Austin and Daisy a chance to react. He left the Pantheon world in the blink of an eye. With his current strength, no one could stop him if he wanted to leave. He had stayed just to show off his strength, so that they wouldn't bother him in the future. The heavenly world. This time, Ji Nan didn't intend to hide his return. Almost all the Fusing Daos received the news immediately. The Fusing Daos conference started again. Compared to the bleak situation in the Pantheon world, the situation in the heavenly world was much better. Apart from Qin Guanruo, who had died at the very beginning, and Zhao Renwang, who had fought to the death without retreating, the other Fusing Daos managed to preserve themselves and didn't die at the hands of the lords. However, the losses were still very heavy. Out of the 16 heavenly worlds, only 3 were left, and the rest had to be rebuilt. Both sides have suffered losses this time. After everyone arrived, Yu Lian was the first to speak. Based on the current situation, we should focus on defense. Time is on our side. Her words weren't difficult to understand. After all, most of the Fusing Daos were still alive. Rebuilding the astral world was much easier than giving birth to a new lord. Once the Fusing Daos whose astral world had been destroyed in this battle recovered a small portion of their battle strength, they would be able to participate in the new battle. "I'm afraid the other side won't give us that chance," Dream Immortal said coldly. She was probably the one who had suffered the most among the Fusing Daos who were still alive. She had just been resurrected, expended too much energy on Ji Nan, sustained injuries on the battlefield, and finally had her astral world destroyed. However, Dream Immortal was right. As long as Austin and the others weren't stupid, they definitely wouldn't let up on their attacks. After all, they still had the upper hand on paper. Zhu Jiming said with a smile, "I heard that in the final battle, Ji Nan, you fought 3 lords alone and even injured Baya." The Fusing Daos had actually witnessed the battle between Ji Nan and Austin's trio. Yu Lian also said, "With Ji Nan here, even if the other side sends another lord, we will have a plan to deal with them." Not counting Ji Nan, it was now 4 against 2 in terms of high-end battle strength. The All Heavens basically had no chance of winning. However, Ji Nan just glanced at Yu Lian and said, "I won't be around for now." He had only come back to consolidate his realm. Once his 14th level nomological laws and body were completely stabilized, the original realm would be his next target. The atmosphere instantly turned cold. Song Fei coughed softly and said, "Ji Nan, you are also a member of the All Heavens. Moreover, The cause of this battle was you all teaming up to kill Fan Lun. You want to go find the original realm? Lu Wen suddenly spoke, interrupting Song Fei's words. He looked at Ji Yunan and asked. He had no intention of avoiding the other fusing Daos and directly revealed the word original realm. At this stage, Ji Yunan didn't care if anyone knew where the original realm was. He nodded. Lu Wen frowned slightly but didn't say anything else. He lowered his head and seemed to be thinking about something. Meanwhile, Ju Po just stood above and watched everything calmly. The others didn't know what the original realm was, but now was not the time to be concerned about this. Amitabha. Monk Fa Kong put his palms together and said, with the invasion of the gods, the all heavens will be plunged into misery and suffering. Benefactor Ji Yunan, please stay a little longer. Elder Zi Luo also said, if it's not an urgent matter, why don't you wait until the battle has truly settled down before leaving? Immortal Dream even stepped in front of Ji Yunan and said, the invasion of the gods is partly because of you, right? If we are defeated this time, you won't have a good ending either. No one had ever forgotten Ji Yunan's identity as the enemy of the gods. However, Ji Yunan only glanced at the three who spoke and then walked out unhurriedly. Whatever he wanted to do, he would never be influenced by others. Immortal Dream looked at his back and said with a slightly cold gaze, Ji Yunan, you are already the enemy of the gods. Do you still want to become enemies with us as well? Hearing this, Ji Yunan thought for a moment and then turned around. Countless shadow tentacles suddenly reached out and grabbed Immortal Dream in front of him. The suppression of the 14th level shadow precepts made Immortal Dream, who had lost her astral realm, completely unable to resist. He then reached out a hand and casually snapped Immortal Dream's neck. He looked strangely at the corpse on the ground.